Good morning, and welcome to the FCC Cybersecurity Workshop for Broadcasters. We're delighted that you've joined us for this important event. Printed agendas are available in the back with participant biographies. This event will be recorded and live streamed. The recording will be added to the FCC's website after the conclusion of the event. We have 3 great sessions planned for today, starting with a presentation on cybersecurity threats facing broadcasters. Afterwards, we'll have a panel that will discuss the real-life examples and recommended best practices to address those examples to mitigate cyber risk. And lastly, we'll close with the workshop with a presentation on how to prepare for and respond to a cyber attack. But first, I'm pleased to introduce Zenji Nakazawa, Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, who will offer opening remarks. Zenji.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. And thank you, George, for that introduction. Welcome to the FCC's workshop on cybersecurity for broadcasters. I appreciate all of you being here today and for the work you do every day to keep the public informed, connected, and safe. Broadcasting is more than an industry. It's part of the nation's critical information communications infrastructure. This workshop is also part of a broader conversation taking place over the next 2 days. Today, we're focused on the unique cybersecurity challenges facing broadcasters. And tomorrow, we will turn to communications providers and the networks that underpin so much of our nation's connectivity and emergency communications capabilities. Together, these discussions reflect a shared reality. Cybersecurity and operational resilience are essential to public safety, economic security, and national security. In moments of crisis, national disasters, public safety emergencies, severe weather, acts of violence, or national security incidents, the public turns to broadcasters for timely and trusted information, and that responsibility is significant, and increasingly it comes with cyber risk. Cyber attacks against broadcasters are occurring with greater frequency and sophistication. These incidents are not theoretical, and they are not limited to the IT department or engineering floor. They can disrupt operations, compromise systems, interfere with emergency communications, and undermine trust. Last November, the FCC's Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau issued a public notice encouraging broadcasters to strengthen cybersecurity practices after a series of incidents involving compromised broadcast equipment and the transmission of false emergency alert signals, including offensive and unauthorized content. In several cases, attackers exploited vulnerabilities involving studio-to-transmitter links and related systems that are essential to delivering programming to the public. Now, this should concern us all, because when malicious actors target broadcasters, they are not just targeting the businesses, they are targeting one of the most trusted and immediate pathways for delivering potentially life-saving information to the American people. Trust matters. Just imagine the consequences of a cyber attack that broadcasts a false evacuation order or fabricated emergency warning. The result could be panic, overwhelmed emergency responders, and a loss of confidence in the systems people depend on during their most vulnerable moments. These are economic consequences as well: service disruptions, reputational harm, lost advertising revenue, and operational cost. But the stakes extend beyond the balance sheet. This is about resilience, continuity, and confidence in our nation's communications system. That's why this workshop matters. Addressing these threats requires collaboration across industry, government, and the broader communications sector. And under Chairman Brendan Carr's leadership, the FCC has continued to emphasize the importance of strengthening the security and resilience of the nation's communications infrastructure against evolving cyber threats. Today, you will hear from broadcasters, government partners, engineers, cybersecurity professionals, and legal experts about the threat landscape facing the broadcast sector, the vulnerabilities adversaries seek to exploit, and the practical steps organizations can take to strengthen their defenses and respond effectively when incidents occur. Now, our goal is straightforward: to provide actionable guidance that helps you better protect your systems, your operations, and the audiences who depend on you. Cybersecurity is no longer just a technical issue. It's an operational issue, a public safety issue, and increasingly a national security issue. Thank you again for joining us and contributing your expertise to this important conversation. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Wayne Pacina of Texas A&M University and KAMU FM TV, TV-FM. Now, Wayne serves as Associate Director of Educational Broadcast Services at Texas A&M University and brings more than 50 years of experience in broadcasting and IP networking. He's a fellow and past president of the Society of Broadcast Engineers, a recipient of the SBE Educator of the Year and Radio World Engineer of the Year awards, and serves as a distinguished lecturer for the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineering Broadcast Technology Society. Wayne will help frame the current threat environment facing broadcasters and the challenges ahead. Wayne, thank you. The floor is yours.
Well, good morning, everyone. It certainly is a pleasure to be with you today. Let me get set up here and get my slide up, and hopefully you are seeing that momentarily. Well, as my subtitle says, there are some treats that the broadcasters face. However, it's not Halloween, so those what might be treats during Halloween are threats that we have today. So, what I have planned for the next hour or so is kind of a brief introduction and look at some of the cybersecurity threats, particularly kind of generalizing into four categories, ranging from denial of service to content hijacking that might occur, malware, and certainly ransomware. We want to look at who the threat actor or threat actors might be, and then kind of the process of how do you actually launch a cyber attack, and then specifically look at some of the unique attacks that have occurred, particularly in the broadcast realm, and then kind of look at some of the tools that can be used either for malicious hacking or, in some cases, white hat hacking. In other words, we want to use those tools to help defend our systems, and then a couple of examples of using those tools, and then we'll wrap things up. So if we look at a little bit of the history of particularly some of the events that occurred, if we go back to around 2017, KQED in San Francisco probably was one of the first, not the first cyber event that occurred for broadcasting, but probably the first that was actually widely publicized. Most organizations, most companies, that's not something you want to advertise that, hey, I've been hit with a cyber attack. But KQED took, I think, a unique approach at the time to widely publicize what occurred to their stations and the impact that it had. Since then, we've seen numerous industry trade publication headlines of different organizations that have had cyber events that have occurred, and virtually every major broadcast organization has suffered some type of event. What often, though, is not reflected in the industry headlines is the many small broadcasts, even might described as that mom and pop radio station that never make the headlines. And of course, as has been noted recently, we've seen uh, both warnings, we've seen notices from the FCC involving specific hacks that have occurred to the broadcast industry. If we go back even further, disrupting broadcast operations is not necessarily new, but it was very unique. If we go back, say in the late 80s, Max Headroom at least became popular for a few minutes in the Chicago area, where a broadcast station's programming was disrupted with some alternate programming. Actually, the that particular evening, there were two stations that were disrupted. Captain Midnight became famous also back in the, say, mid 80s of disrupting a satellite transponder channel. And if we look at both of those events and at the era that those occurred, that took some a certain amount of technical expertise to pull that off. To disrupt an STL path to those Chicago stations took obviously the right equipment, but that equipment had to be physically located in the right location to override those STL paths. To disrupt a satellite transponder that also took obviously some expertise, but it took the right equipment to be able to do that. And of course, today, as we have moved into the IP infrastructure, now that same disruption can be accomplished from virtually anywhere through the networking resources. So, if we look at our broadcast station, certainly it is no secret that our infrastructure has changed. We've gone from that traditional, what I'll refer to as a baseband plant, into the IP or the IT based infrastructure. And now that traditional rack room or that technical operations center looks more like a data center with traditional dedicated equipment replaced with computers running specific broadcast application software on them. And with that, we have created a environment that gives us a lot of advantages, but it also gives us some new challenges. And particularly, we're opening that infrastructure to attack. And that attack may just simply be to access the system, to maybe cause some operational disruption. Maybe we want to do some type of tampering with that system. And of course, we can do that from various locations. Maybe while we're enjoying our favorite beverage, we don't have to be physically within the plant uh, of the infrastructure. Because we do want often remote access, we have to open a door to that infrastructure. So our challenge is, yes, we need to open the door, but we need to control who we open that door to and how far, let's say, we open that door. And with that, there is a laundry list of possible threats that uh, we can be challenged with. Certainly, the trade headlines, we have read about the numerous ransomware event. We also have denial of service type attacks or more um, specifically distributed denial of service. And we'll look in a little later in this presentation of why we specifically see the distributed denial of service attacks. But we have malware that can be ingested, ranging from worms to viruses to some type of spyware, man in the middle attacks, various types of, again, manipulation of that IT based infrastructure that we have. And that list goes on and on. Certainly, today's broadcasters, they face those same type of cybersecurity threats that any business or any organization faces, but they also have some unique threats, and we have certainly seen industry demonstration of these occurring, and that certainly is probably led by hijacking the, let's say, audio path or the content path between a studio and a transmitter. We've certainly seen EAS, encoder decoder manipulation. Maybe that is simply broadcasting false EAS tones, maybe false alerts, or general disruption of the EAS infrastructure. And certainly, we've seen the ransomware occurring and denial of service attacks. From the broadcaster side, though, there is certainly a lot of risk involved, and probably the number one is dead air or alternate programming. As broadcast engineers, we work very hard to ensure we don't have dead air. We're always on the air and we have the proper content on the air. And when that doesn't occur, we often are faced with a loss of revenue because spots or commercials don't air, and maybe some public embarrassment is involved, particularly if, let's say, alternate programming is broadcast or false information is relayed. Often, some of that comes with a liability. Because obviously the broadcaster is held responsible for the content they broadcast. And of course, there may even be breach of data. Often that data, of course, is financial information, that sort of thing. So again, the broadcaster faces certainly several potential risks that occurs. And I think that public embarrassment is often probably the one that is sometimes overlooked, but also is probably the most difficult one to to correct from and recover. So we mentioned malware as being a one of the potential threats that is out there. And with that, malware can take many different forms, ranging from something like adware, which is not necessarily destructive in any nature. It certainly is an annoyance for these random ads, let's say, to be popping up on workstations and so forth. But certainly there are plenty more types that are malicious in nature that are, again, focused on some type of either disruption, maybe obtaining additional information, such as a keylogger. It could be used to harvest login credentials for other systems and so forth. Even such things as scareware. We mentioned earlier we're past our treats and it's not Halloween, but there is scareware that's out there that are really not doing anything disruptive or destructive. They're just giving false indications and causing maybe some unnecessary panic and some unnecessary disruptive applications. And again, many different forms of malware. But a key aspect of malware, there often are indications that there is a potential issue there. And particularly, though, that indications are all centered around when there's some type of um, unanticipated or some type of change that's occurred within your IT infrastructure, and there's not really a business reason for that change, such as a change in network performance. Um, Often that performance is not increased performance, it is degraded performance, and maybe that's centered around some unusual network activity where it's inbound traffic or maybe even outbound traffic. So, really, what this says is you need to monitor your IT infrastructure, because if you're not monitoring it, you really don't know when something abnormal occurs. And again, this can take many different forms of multiple attempted failed login attempts to activity at unusual times of the day or night for your business, or simply system changes. So, as broadcast engineers, we're used to monitoring our infrastructure. Pretty much, I think we can say we all have a some type of transmitter monitoring system for our transmission plant to ensure that we maintain our operating power within the uh, uh, respective limits as imposed by the FCC regulations, as well as our licensed TPO or ERP. And of course, the other factors of that transmission plant are monitored. Well, we need to do the same thing with our IT infrastructure. So, who might the threat actor, or in some cases, threat actors, who might these these be? And of course, they can take a a pretty wide range of potential that might be looking to do harm. Certainly, we have nation state warfare that can occur, and generally, the nation state, they're focused on some type of political discontent. Maybe is the best way to describe, or geopolitical type discontent. But I think for most broadcasters, and this is a personal opinion, that the criminal hacker or the hacktivists probably are the most common threat actors that you will encounter. Now, that does not discount, a terrorist group, for instance, that has some ideological um, viewpoint that they are looking to promote. It doesn't discount, the a foreign adversary or some terrorist group that exist. But again, I think that criminal hacker is really the most logical one that comes into place for the broadcast station, and that is also probably the easiest one to prevent, because simply their motivation is really pretty simple. It's financial. They're looking to extort or somehow gain money, and often a little bit of barrier to that activity will send them on down the road, so to speak, to the next potential victim. Whereas the hacktivist probably has a grudge or some type of discontent against the broadcast station. There's also often what is described as the script kiddies, which is simply someone that they are looking just to access systems that, well, they don't have normal access to. They're not out to be disruptive, to destroy things. Uh, they're simply looking to access a system. And one of the challenges that often occurs with the script kiddies is mistakes can happen. And whereas they don't, I guess, intend any harm, often harm can occur from them. But in reality, we have these images of the hacker, sitting in a dark room with a hoodie on, staring at a green screen terminal, or the script kiddie in their basement. That's not reality. The reality is you have applications that are being executed in a data center environment that are constantly scanning or crawling or patrolling the public internet, and they're looking for uh, potential victims or potential systems in which to get into. So that creates a challenge for us at that level. And also, we don't want to overlook a disgruntled employee or someone discontent. Now, whether this ad is real or a spoof or not, it did appear in LinkedIn just last month of someone advertising um, by using some social engineering for someone to help in the uh, attack of a potential system. If we look at one of the fundamentals of IT security, we find the CIA triad. And by the way, the acronym CIA does not refer or have anything to do with the government agency with that same acronym. But the triad basically is the fundamental goal of IT security. But to the threat actor, that CIA triad now becomes the target where we want to take confidentiality and turn that into disclosure, but maybe breaching organizational data or decoding encrypted information or even exposing some of sensitive information from an organization. We also, our integrity becomes alteration, where we want to somehow change maybe data that is at rest in some type of storage system, or maybe change it through a workflow process, or even um, transitioning a network. And then finally, that availability becomes denial or disruption. We want to disrupt the normal system operation through some type of viruses or malware, ransomware, maybe some uh, outages in the infrastructure, and just in some cases, destroying infrastructure or some type of denial of service attack. If we look at a cyber attack, we find that a pattern or a flow chart of activities occurs with that. And that begins with the reconnaissance. In other words, we need to identify or find a target to potentially attack. Once we have a target, then we can maybe make some assessment. Are there some vulnerabilities here? Or do I move on to the next potential target? And there's many ways to identify targets. One, of course, is social media, which really says you should be careful about what you post on social media, particularly concerning your infrastructure. You may be very proud of the latest whiz bang gizmo that you just added to your station infrastructure, and you post a picture of that device that, on some form of social media, and you just happen to have a label on the front of that device with the IP number. So again, real simple things. Want to be very, very cautious in doing. Also, certainly there's tools built into virtually every operating system that are meant for troubleshooting purposes, but such as the ping command can be used to basically explore and seek potential uh, host targets. And certainly there's some tools out there that can be used as well. And we'll look at an example of that later in this presentation. But also be aware that sometimes after a potential uh, threat is identified or delivered to a target, it's really not triggered. And there is some dwell time that might be introduced before that exploit actually is triggered. And that dwell time has been found to range from maybe it may be in minutes to hours to days. Even some have been identified for several months before some type of event triggers. That may be a timed event, that may be the occurrence of some other event that triggers that. So, what we want to do is stop the reconnaissance part, or we want to stop the exploration or network. That's our ideal situation. However, often because we want that remote access, remember back with opening that front door, we want to control that. We have to at least limit that visibility because we do need some access, but we want to limit that visibility. To look a little more specific at the broadcast chain and some of the more recent events we've seen, they have all the same threats that any other, again, organization or company has. But because of the nature of the broadcast industry, there are some unique, I guess, opportunities that come along or for that. And we've certainly seen the studio to transmitter link audio paths disrupted. We have seen disruption or hijacking of RDS data that is becoming more and more popular, particularly in display and car dashboards. And of course, the EAS encoder decoder, again, either for content disruption, alternate information, and so forth. In a simple world, devices such as that STL equipment, your RDS encoders, your EAS encoder decoder, you never should be connected to the public internet. It's just simple, plain and simple. But often that STL path may be the public internet. So you have to take obviously some precautions into place. Now, one of the reasons that a lot of this has not, it's taken a while to occur, the broadcast infrastructure has been sort of, I don't want to say in its own bubble, but it's somewhat isolated from general knowledge. But that is changing. I'll go back to 2022. A presentation was made at the DEF CON conference. And in case you're not familiar with DEF CON, that is considered a white hat hacker conference that occurs each year. But anyway, there was a presentation made about hacking the EAS system. And, I've been in this business for a number of years, and I thought I pretty well knew a lot about the EAS system, but I learned a lot from this particular presentation. It was very detailed into the EAS infrastructure and how the alerting work and the design details of EAS and decoders. So all of a sudden, this was not necessarily that internal secret anymore, limited to a few. If we look at kind of a practical, what I'll say is a practical station, uh, and I'll call this the unprotected station. And this is an actual station. This is not something I dreamed up. but it is using the public internet as the STL. And of course, at the transmitter side, we have a transmitter and we have a EAS encoder decoder. And we, of course, have several different types of signals we're dealing with, all the way from either analog or AES audio. And certainly we have RDS data that may be in the form of Ethernet, but it also could be in a more discrete data format, such as an RS-232 data. And of course, we have Ethernet connectivity for our devices. And of course, in this unprotected environment, this um, system is very vulnerable. Well, the first thing I think we have to protect that EAS encoder or decoder simply because of the nature of the device, it has to have public internet connectivity because one of its requirements is it has to reach the EAS cap server world that's out there. So at a minimum, we need a firewall between the public internet and that EAS encoder decoder. And particularly, there's many different types of products out there. You know, the old saying, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. Well, there's sort of the modern day version. No one ever got fired for buying Cisco. But Cisco makes a wide range of products from very, very expensive to not so expensive. So this is certainly an under $1,000 solution. But implementing that firewall would be a very minimal requirement when in an EAS environment. And of course, if you're installing a firewall, you have to create a rule or a rule set because we only want the ability for that EAS encoder decoder to talk to the CAP servers. So we might create a rule such as this that would allow that to occur. But at the same time, we'll want to deny all the inbound traffic to that device, and that's taken care of by kind of default. So there's no individual rule we would have to create. So in a very, very simplistic environment, this is kind of one of the minimal things that would need to do. A more practical look at things, and by the way, don't overlook changing default login credentials because that's one of those simple things that is often overlooked many times. If we look at a kind of expanded version of that basic station, we really need to encrypt the information between our studio and our transmitter side across that public internet link, whether that is an IP radio or that is actually, utilizing public internet. And we can do that relatively easy with some various devices that are generically referred to as a VPN server, Ethernet switch, firewall combinations. There's many such devices like this that are on the market and available today. And I'll have in later on in a resource page the specifics for this particular device that is in the under $500 category. But this allows us to encrypt that information across the public internet. Of course, we often in a situation like this want remote access for this infrastructure. And in this case, we would add also from a client user, a VPN tunnel so we could access that remote infrastructure. We had talked about denial of service attacks, and a denial of service attack is simply one where we attempt to overwhelm a target server with simply flood it with traffic. That traffic may be HTTP requests or synchronization requests. As kind of a reminder, a synchronization request is how a TCP/IP connection begins. It begins with a synchronization uh, command to initiate that handshake between. But we can just bombard that target server with synchronization requests, often referred to as half open requests, because we never complete the full process, but it requires uh, that server to quote stop and listen to that synchronization request. Well, from a practical term today, this is kind of difficult to do, simply because as the speed of our network infrastructure has increased to the performance of our different servers, or what that target host might be, this is often difficult to really do that much disruption. So things have gone to the practical side, or the reality is that of a distributed denial of service attacks, where we have several different hosts that have been uh, basically infected with a malware such as a botnet, and those individual hosts simply act as um, a, the attacker, again, all centered to a target host device. And just to put some practical um, numbers or metrics with some of the past attacks, there have been documented of attack hosts ranging in excess of 250,000 attack host, in particular, the example one of using a pretty popular router device that is out there, and then generating in reality over 22 million requests per second, uh, representing about, well, over 2 terabits per second of data traffic. This level of traffic can overwhelm most networks. If there is a good thing about a denial of service attacks, generally those are not disruptive, though, or they are disruptive. They're not destructive. The attack stops and everything returns to normal. But often that denial of service attack really is just a prelude to what is coming next. And often, what is next is ransomware. And ransomware is simply a malicious malware that is evolving. That, in other words, yesterday's ransomware is not what today's is. And in general, you're going to find that ransomware can doing one of many things, or combinations of encrypting files, blocking access to those files, maybe collecting uh, some type of sensitive information. Often this is financial information, uh, and then encrypting that information and so forth. So again, many things can happen. And of course, the end result of ransomware is demanding a ransom. Often that is paid in bitcoins, and with that, you pay the ransom, you hopefully get your files de-encrypted, all the access returns, and so forth and so on, you hope. If you're dealing with ransomware, you hope you're dealing with a basically an honest threat actor there. Again, ransomware is involving. A real simple kind of look at how ransomware works. Once again, there is a target that is impacted. This is an example of CryptoLocker. You've identified it. There's been a execution of the files. Again, um, that information is targeted and captured. Encryption keys are created. Files are encrypted. Often that it focuses or begins with the local drive, then seeks to expand to either external connected drives, which may be something like a USB drive, and of course to mapped network drives. And this network drive mapping is where it really can get destructive or disruptive. And that ransomware simply, again, infects all of these. And again, a good ransomware threat is going to clean up. In other words, they're going to remove all the tracks of what happened in the system. And of course, the dreaded message that often appears that where to pay your ransom, so to speak. Let's look at some of the tools that exist out there. And I'm going to refer to these tools as white hat hacker tools. In other words, we are going to use these tools to ensure that our systems are properly set up and provisioned to prevent access to them. Also, these are the same tools that threat actor might be used. And one of the fundamental ones that exist is that of Nmap or Network Mapper, which simply is a tool that allows you to first find and discover active network host. Once you discover a host, you can find information about that host. In this example, you can see that particularly it's a Cisco device. You can look at some of the specifics of it, but the key is you're determining open ports. And of course, an open port indicates a service that is available. And again, a potential threat can target a particular service and then simply use it to diagram a network infrastructure. If I discover one host device, then likely there are more, and we can use tools to discover those additional devices. And if you look at Nmap, it is a pretty powerful tool. This is kind of a short list of different commands. Well, there's well over 125 Nmap commands. And if you look at the individual commands and the different switch character configurations, you could approach probably 1,000 different potential commands that can be used to simply scan either single host devices, a range of IP addresses, maybe an entire subnet. You can look at different ways to discover uh, host, discover specific host. In other words, you want to maybe target a certain operating system or look for a certain service. So I might look for a certain port number that is open and so forth. So again, a lot of powerful capabilities that exist. But in terms of looking at Nmap, it is I'll call it a somewhat boring, old school user interface, or the green screen, as I often refer to it. And that's pretty boring. So, in general, my examples, we're going to use ZenMap, which is a graphical add-on interface to Nmap. And particularly, we will use that to uh, discover information about a host. Well, I've discovered an IP address that is an active address, but I have no idea what the device is. So let's just simply scan that with Nmap, and we find a lot of information. And certainly, I know you can't read this screen. It's only a screenshot of several screens of information that is returned about this host. But I'll try to kind of blow up some key aspects of that. We look and we discover that this host device has 4 active services because the ports are active or open. And those particular 4 port numbers are all registered port numbers, which in general means we know what kind of services are available, are actively executed on this host device. We can further look into those services and find specifics of the version numbers of those active services, and even to the point of discovering potentially what this device is. And of course, with discovering that, we know that we have discovered a EAS, encoder decoder unit. And of course, the next question is, are there any vulnerabilities to be exploited here? Maybe that first vulnerability might be, does this device have default login information, or has that been changed? Maybe looking further, are they potentially vulnerabilities of, let's say, OpenSSH version 6.9 that I, as the threat actor, can exploit that potentially? Maybe there is, maybe there's not. But again, this is the type of information that can be discovered with simply after finding an active IP address. Another tool that is becoming a lot more popular is Shodan. And Shodan probably is one of the more misunderstood services or tools that are out there. But Shodan is really nothing more than a search engine. This is an example where I'd mentioned you have applications in a data center that are constantly scanning or crawling the public internet, searching for IP connected devices. And this is exactly what Shodan is doing. They are scanning the public internet. They're looking for an IP device with open ports. Again, an open port indicates a service is available, and they simply capture that information. It's all compiled in a database, and you, as a user of Shodan, are querying that database. And you can query that database like you might query any um, database with some combination. Maybe I want to know just host devices that utilize the Windows operating system, or maybe I want to look for specific products and so forth. But there's a world of devices that are out there that have been discovered and continue to be discovered by Shodan. Certainly our broadcast equipment, and but there's a world of other devices out there ranging from, IP-based cameras to, telephone sets to, of course, everyone has an IP-enabled light bulb, right? And again, a wide variety of devices that can be found with Shodan. But I think the most valuable use uh, with Shodan is simply a quick view of what is my internet facing visibility. Remember from my introduction, where one of, I guess, our goals, since we cannot totally disconnect our world, our broadcast world, from the public internet, we will always have some visibility to the public internet. But we want to know what that is. We want to control that. And a quick way to do that is to use Shodan for that. And in fact, Shodan even have some different options where they will continuously monitor uh, given host and so forth for a fee, of course. But in general, Shodan is free to use, although they do set some limits on how many searches you can do, let's say in a 24-hour period. And then you can register and get more rights, pay them some money, and even get more and so forth. But again, knowing what that public visibility is, I think, is one of the key values. Just to look at what you might find, these are some scans that I did earlier that week in preparation for this presentation. And again, I'm not really picking on specific manufacturers, but I'm utilizing, I think, devices that are popular in our industry. And you can see that at least earlier this week, there were 410 barracks devices that were found on the public internet. There were even more tie line devices that were found, not only in the US, but also internationally. And others, again, I'm looking for devices that are popular to our industry. So a lot of potential. Now, does that mean every one of these, let's say these 410 barracks devices are vulnerable? Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but you can certainly explore further. Here's one example that was done, about a year ago in preparation for another one of my presentations, where on that particular day we found 616 barracks devices. Lo and behold, one of those out of that group still had default login information in it. And what did that allow you to do? Well, you simply could bring up the graphical interface for that particular device. And of course, you can use your imagination what you might do next. In a simple way, maybe you just stop the client, which disrupts obviously the audio path for this particular station. But maybe you went a little further and you redirected where that client was pointed and replaced your information. So again, something that you should never be able to access such a device like that. Now, maybe the tools like Nmap and Shodan are not too exciting to you, uh, and you're not really into that level of network hacking, but you still want to cause disruption. So we also have several software as a service type, not companies, but organizations that exist to basically provide crime to you, or ransomware services to you. And this is the reality that exists out there, particularly in the dark web environment. And you might have run across the term of the deep web and the dark web. Well, the deep web is simply websites that are not indexed by this popular search engines such as Google, or again, whatever your favorite search engine is. Dark websites simply usually have some type of password protection, maybe a paywall to them. For instance, your bank account is not searched. by Google because that particular account basically is protected. However, in the dark web is kind of a subset uh, where that information is uh, held privately and often requires a special browser to access that information. And thus you find companies that are advertising their services uh, for a fee, of course, in which to implement some type of cyber attack. We also see that certainly artificial intelligence has its place in cybersecurity defense uh, to particularly do things such as enable real-time detection, uh, automate responses, and simply look for or seek threats often faster than humans really can do that. At the same time, you have to be very aware that AI is also used in threat creation and launch, from generating some type of phishing or social engineering creation, often utilizing the deep fake or identity fake capabilities of AI. Um, Often used to discover vulnerabilities a lot quicker and so forth. And again, widespread automation of botnets. That botnet might be used for a distributed denial of service attack, for instance. So I think as we look ahead, AI is going to continue to have a widespread use in defense strategy, but also is going to have a active use in the creation of threats, accelerating the process, accelerating the scale and the sophistication of those threats that exist there. And often, what is now a manual process moves to a totally, fully automated, autonomous type malware uh, attack with very little human engagement. Social engineering is one aspect that is alive and well. If we look back over kind of the course of cybersecurity preventions, a lot of threats that existed in the past are really not a threat today because technology and processes and our infrastructure design, I'm not going to say has eliminated them, but they've minimized them to the point they're not really a practical threat. And the threat actors move on to things that, quote, work. Because again, a lot of the threat actors are motivated by money. So if they're not making money with a particular threat, the natural progression is to move on to something else, and that something else is social engineering because it is alive and well. And yes, there are some technology things that can be done to prevent social engineering, but the real threat has to do with the people in your organization, the users, and that social engineering is focused on them. So the way to combat that really is education with your user base, and particularly it all centers around that process of social engineering, convincing someone to do something, to click on this link or open this document or whatever. And kind of the key of that is an education process. One of the more convincing, I think, links I've seen recently is this particular one where it looks like, well, I'm, going to Microsoft .com, but in reality, that domain name, instead of beginning with an M, is really an R and an N. And obviously, that might take me to somewhere I really don't want to go. So again, the social engineering and educating your users on some of those red flags are really a key to prevention there. With cybersecurity, we do have a challenge. We want to balance security with usability. I can design a very, very secure infrastructure that to some would be unusable because of the restrictions and the limits. At the same time, you can make a very, very usable system that has virtually no security to it. So there is a balance, and this balance has to be achieved in your environment, in your business, in your workflow, and so forth. Of course, we can create that ultimate network security simply as an air gap. We want to just simply not connect any of our critical broadcast infrastructure to the public internet, and really question, does a critical host device need public network access? At the same time you ask that question, though, you also have to recognize that secure remote access is not the same as public network access. So this goes back to that, don't ever connect that critical devices to the public internet. They have to be properly connected with the proper protections and so forth. Just some research for possible use. I had mentioned, of course, Nmap and Shodan. Those are basically public domain type programs. I'd used in some of my example a particularly security device from Farwalla, and there's a reference number. And I really did mention the CISA Known Exploited Vulnerabilities Catalog, but this can be a very useful resource to you. It is frequently updated, and earlier this week there was a little over 1,500 individual entries. Not every entry would apply to everyone's network, but it gives you a good perspective of the known vulnerabilities that do exist and what the precaution steps are to take with that device. Some of those vulnerabilities simply is a matter of updating software in particular devices. But it gives you a good perspective as to some of the potentials that are out there. And again, you can receive updates as things are added to this database over time. When I first began doing some cybersecurity type presentations a few years back, I had this list of you must do these 4 or 5 things. Well, my list is now expanded somewhat. But I think some of the key takeaways I'd like to leave you with is there really is no single solution that exists regarding cybersecurity. You really need to have multiple protections or follow one of the principles of IT security referred to as defense in depth. You have multiple layers of protection that existed. At one time, yes, a firewall was pretty much all you needed to have a secure environment, and things have advanced well past that. With that mindset of utilizing defense in depth, simply you need to know what you need to protect, and that's where the inventory comes in. And then you can utilize things such as that CAV catalog to maybe prioritize where I focus my effort first. One of the key things in cybersecurity is you have to have the right network infrastructure, and that is a segmented network because we want to limit the attack plane. If you are compromised, you want to limit the reach of that compromise, and a key to that is that segmented network infrastructure that often you build through utilizing individual VLANs in your infrastructure. And then, of course, take advantage of security features that most likely already exist in your network infrastructure, such as port security features of managed Ethernet switches. Certainly, it is constantly repeated of changing default login credentials. It is amazing how many devices that exist out in the real world that still have default login credentials. And tools such as Nmap, Shodan, and even more sophisticated tools such as Metasploit that a particular threat actor might use can easily discover those devices with default login credentials. And when you change them, certainly we want to use unique and strong type passwords. Simple, again, often simple housekeeping or cyber hygiene practices can minimize a lot of problems that exist out there. And of course, another way to reduce that attack plane is simply disable services that often are available by default that you don't really need or really using. Well, disable those type of devices or utilize again, firewall or access control list features to make those unavailable through the public side of things. And then finally, again, don't overlook social engineering because that is alive and well. And one of the reasons it is popular and being used is because it works or it's working adequately enough. Again, a single successful phishing attempt can really negate a lot of cybersecurity type applications. So with that pretty much wraps me up. I always welcome your comments, your questions, and you'll see contact information for me on the screen. So it's been my pleasure to join you this morning virtually. So I'll send it back to Washington.
Thank you, Wayne. It was a great presentation. It really underscores the various clear and very present cyber threats to broadcasters. So thank you very much for joining us today. We'll take a slightly longer break than we anticipated, but we'll see everybody back around 11:35, where we'll start our panel on examples of cybersecurity best practices and how to mitigate them. Again, that'll be at 11:35, and if you need the restrooms, they are out the back doors to your left and right. See you in a bit. Thank you. Welcome back. It's now time for our best practices panel, where we'll discuss cybersecurity best practices. This panel is moderated by Drew Morin, our Deputy Chief of the Public Safety Bureau's Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division. Drew, over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, George. Wayne's presentation, wow. That was a very interesting outline of a threat landscape and the broad attack surfaces that broadcasters have to deal with, demonstrating it's critically important to put these protections in place today. Criminals and foreign adversaries, they seek to disrupt, they seek to destroy, and they seek to threaten the delivery of critical broadcasts, especially when they're needed most, but at all times they threaten that. I think every broadcaster, regardless of size, needs to take the steps now to start defending against these attacks and to prepare in advance to respond when the event does occur. In this session, you'll hear from a panel of experts from industry and government about actions you can take to secure your networks by implementing proven best practices. Joining us today are Roswell Clark. He's the Executive Director of Radio Engineering for Cox Media Group and is responsible for broadcast technical operations and business continuity planning, cybersecurity resilience, and regulatory compliance across Cox Media Group's radio portfolio. Also joining us is, it's in different order here. At the end here is Brian Kaiser, and he's served in federal law enforcement for over a decade, has investigated a range of violations from violent crimes, financial crimes, criminally motivated cyber attacks, and national security incidents, including cyber attacks against operational technology in critical infrastructure environments. Brian is currently the lead for the FBI Cyber Division's Critical Sector Engagement and Intelligence Unit. Welcome, Brian. Then Daniel Parsons serves as the Chief Information Security Officer at the EW Scripps Company. With over 15 years of cybersecurity expertise, he previously held senior leadership roles at NBC Universal for nearly 6 years, and most recently as Vice President of Cyber Defense, overseeing global security defense. His expertise crosses the finance, defense, and retail industries. And online with us today, we have Valicia Stachetti. She's a senior cybersecurity engineer at the Center for Internet Security, where she supports the CIS critical security controls. Previously, she served as CIS's information security audit manager and led the cyber incident response team, supporting multi-state information sharing and analysis centers, state, local, tribal, and territorial community. So, welcome, and let's go ahead and get started here. The first question is related to how we start preparing our organization. Cyber risk management strategy lays in the foundation for how the organization can achieve its cybersecurity goals. Creating a strategy doesn't need to be burdensome exercise. So I'd like to ask you, Roz, first, and then we'll follow up with Dan on where should a broadcaster begin when developing its cybersecurity risk management strategy, and who should be involved in the cyber risk management planning?
Well, where to begin? I think what you don't want to do is not include all interested parties of the organization. I really think that starts, at least in our organization, with the CEO on down, but there has to be some roles and responsibilities established. What you also don't want to miss is that the broadcast engineering team really needs to be fully involved and immersed in that. I represent broadcast engineering primarily, although I've had a background in IT and managing all of that. But what you don't want to do is have anyone feel like this is handled by one entity or the other. Everyone has skin in the game. Mm-hmm. And so if you have, hopefully you have someone that's focused on security primarily, but I believe that needs to go out into all facets of it. And as you heard in Wayne's presentation, network engineering and all the systems that are involved in maintaining the operations, both in the broadcast and other.
That's great. Dan, would you like to kind of chime in on this as well, please?
Yeah, I'll build upon what Roz said. You know, obviously the group you work with, the ones you choose to bring into this process is important because you need to understand the multiple layers of the impact of the cyber resiliency plan and how you're going to respond to things. You know, to kind of build on that, once you have the right group, you really need to understand the landscape of your environment, understand your network, understand your exposure, understand your biggest risk and your critical infrastructure. And I think that's how you have to start looking at this, is have the right group, have the right landscape and visibility into where your biggest risks are, and then figure out where those weak points are, and then try to build a plan around the resiliency and recovery. And try not to boil the ocean, right? If you try to kind of build a holistic approach right out of the gate, people are going to get a little bit burned out, and you're going to probably end up fixing things that are easier but not the most important.
Excellent, thank you. Brian, would you like to weigh in on the idea of a written cybersecurity plan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think talking about what you're going to do before an incident happens is huge, right? Because in the event of an incident, there's going to be a million things that are going off, things that you have to address right now, things that are, they're going to be hard decisions. And so really understanding that and having that discussion prior to an incident is key. And I think a lot of people haven't really thought about that. We deal a lot, I've said before, with critical infrastructure, but thinking about if somebody were to take the devices that you implicitly trust and use them against you, what does that mean? And I think that's a really good conversation to be having with people in your organization, and a reason to do it prior to an incident.
Felicia, you're online. Would you care to chime in and tell us provide some guidance as far as what we would want to include in that risk management strategy and risk management policy?
Especially if you're in the did I get an echo? Maybe not.
I'm
Can you
sorry,
hear
we
me?
had some audio concerns here.
Okay.
Felicia, if you have your volume up on your computer, you'll have an echo, so you turn that down, and then I think we can hear you in the room, so you're good.
Okay. How is that?
Much better.
Okay, sorry about that. So, yeah, a lot of times policies are viewed as more of a compliance checklist type of item rather than a living, breathing document. So I think it's definitely important to set the tone for the organization's view on cybersecurity, right? So more importantly, it needs to align with business objectives of the organization. So in my opinion, a good policy has buy-in at the top and then adoption all the way down throughout the organization. So policies are kind of like lease agreements, right? Or an employee handbook. It's sort of instead for your organization's data and systems. So it's going to define what you are allowing, what is not allowed, and then what happens when the rules are broken, because accountability is just as important. I think more importantly, an effective policy, you need to have things like the objectives of your cybersecurity program, the defining like roles and responsibilities, and then depending on what other policies and standards you have in the organization, sometimes the information security policy could be smaller and then the other ones support it. It depends on how you structure it. But I think the bigger key takeaway is not to have like a 50-page policy per se just because you think you have to, right? Maybe you do because there's that much stuff to put into it, but a smaller policy can be just as effective as a larger one.
Okay, just as a quick follow-up, we talked about different constituencies being participants. What is a way to engage the leadership that's an effective way to get them to and be involved in it and to reach out to get these additional constituencies to participate in developing this type of a planning process? Roz, we'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I'm a big believer in exercising the plan. I'd like to just say what Brian mentioned is super critical. We have a mandate to do yearly exercises of our business continuity planning, which includes other things besides cyber, but I would say cyber being more and more a focus. In the past, we did that, but make sure that that's part of it. And in that exercise, really all the business partners, leaders need to have some skin in the game so they understand when something occurs and there's some lack of or some constraint, what does that mean to the workflow? What does that mean to the impact? How do you protect the core and what action items are assigned? And it's a known thing. And the reason we do that yearly is people, process, technology is constantly changing. And so if you don't rehearse it, you won't know what has changed, what people don't know or what they do know. And I think that's a key vital thing.
Thank you. One of the things you just mentioned concerning the change, rapid pace of change in technology, is when implementing a risk management program, it sounds like it's essential to understand what needs to be protected. So, Daniel, I'm curious, do you have some practical recommendations of methods that an organization might be able to do to identify their most valuable assets, and how often maybe this should be reviewed or updated?
Yeah, I mean, from a frequency perspective, it should begin, find a way to do that ongoing, right? Some way of continuously monitoring what your attack surface looks like and where your exposure lives. From an engineering and an operations perspective, things change day by day, week by week. Certain assets may go down. You may buy something new. It may be a different version. So having a way to look at that supply chain, looking at your procurement process to know as assets are being brought in, where do they sit? Understanding what's internet facing is probably where I would start. If you think about what an attacker is going to see, it's going to be your people, and it's going to be your internet-facing assets, websites, and applications. So having a really strong inventory of those items and having a good awareness program will help you start to understand where are your weak points, and then where do you want to start doubling down either on the risk policy, your incident response plan, some of your mitigating controls. Really kind of look at that. What is that first level, and what is that first asset that the attackers are going to see, and focus on that, and then work your way in.
Excellent. Is there some approach you can recommend, and I'm going to open this to the panel, that would help to identify what are the most critical assets? Are there some basic metrics you kind of look for, some certain position of these assets that we want to help people to understand? Anyone can chime in.
Yeah, I can throw something in here as well that oftentimes what we talk about is that when an attacker is going after something to impede a function, it's a much different type of attack. And I think that there's a really good framework that's done by the Idaho National Lab. It's called consequence-driven cyber-informed engineering, but really it starts with the attacker in mind of, if I'm an attacker looking at your systems, what do I have to impede to stop your functions from happening? And then reverses that and says, well, that's where we can start with understanding which of these assets is the most important, and get everybody on the same page. And I think we've seen that. We work with them a lot to implement that, and we've seen that be very effective, because oftentimes you don't really know who knows the most about the processes, and it actually illuminates that as well as gives you the idea of, okay, this is probably where an attacker would need to go, at least to start.
Fantastic. Valicia, just trying to pull you into this conversation a little bit. I'd like to understand, are there any procedures, processes, tools that you might be able to recommend that can help in terms of assisting the generation, the maintenance of this type of inventory, the identification of those critical assets that you might be able to share with our broadcaster community?
Yeah, and I'll also touch on just one quick note about the scoping of assets. So obviously, in addition to, there's really two ways we look at an asset, right? Does it have sensitive data on it, or is it providing a critical function or service? And so those are the two things that you want to look at when you're trying to scope out your assets. As far as tools and processes, I mean, you don't need an expensive, fancy CMDB to start with, right? You have to start somewhere. And so if the budget or the skill set or the time to implement something like that is a hindrance, then you can also start with something basic like a spreadsheet. I mean, it sounds elementary, but it can be helpful. It's better than nothing, especially if you don't have a ton of assets to manage, then maybe a spreadsheet is manageable. Other things such as like network discovery tools or configuration management tools, a lot of times they'll go out and find systems on the network. The pesky ones are the ones that aren't undiscoverable or harder to discover, and that's can get tricky. But I think the other thing to keep in mind is that the tool is really the enabler, the control implemented, but it's not necessarily the full let's see, how do I say it? It's not the only thing that's important, right? So we want to make sure that we are keeping the data, the inventory in relevant, up to date, timely, right? Those are things that are more important than just having a tool that does the thing, because you can implement a tool anywhere, but if you're not monitoring it, keeping tabs on it, keeping it up to date, then it's just as good as the work you put into it.
So when we're looking at these broadcaster networks, I mean, it's a mixture of networks, isn't it? That have different characteristics. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that, Dan, and then we'll come back to you, Ross?
Yeah, so as you start to look at your business and how you're set up and your networks, looking at where's your back office activity happening. Do some of your HR or finance systems sit on-prem? Are they in the cloud? Are they SaaS providers? So you got to really understand and start classifying the data and the services that you care about the most. And I think that's where you can start to delineate between what do you care about. You have to protect your sensitive data. You need to protect your processes, and then you got to look at your broadcast or your network that provides services to our consumers. And in any way that you can drive a delineation between those two, and if they're intermixed, I would highly suggest you start looking at ways to untangle those so that it's easier to draw that line between the two, because that will give you an opportunity from a risk perspective to either put controls in place, limit the access from left to right between those networks, which is super helpful. The one thing I want to add too is I think about, the risk strategy is I don't think we spend enough time talking about like systemic risk. So when we have services or processes or technologies that are kind of span a whole set of steps that make something happen, you think about how things get to on air, there's a whole path that has to follow. What is that backbone? What is that core piece of it? Especially now that we're talking about AI and automation, that is going to be a backbone for a lot of our processes and hand it off. And so really systemic risk you cannot mitigate. You just have to find ways to help control and protect that. So I think we have to really think about, as we start to implement new technologies, what are those layers of the tech stack or our processes that are systemic that we can't actually mitigate? So we got to protect those the same way we would with our broadcast environment.
Yeah, just to circle back real quick on how do you figure out where your stuff's at. I agree with everything that's been said. In the modern world, we continue to modernize and put some stuff off-prem, software as a service, and stuff is kind of spread around. But what we really do is I like to have a visual diagram. And so it's simple, kind of keep it simple to at least visualize where's your critical, where are your critical assets. So a bubble diagram, if you will. So you could have your automation system or playout system in one bubble. You see what's adjacent to it, what kind of communications are required outside of that to other things. I would look at it as services or systems and try to look at that and say, what is the absolute minimum communication that is required for that to function? And so if you start building those sort of areas, then you can look at, okay, how can I operate if I were to isolate that and maintain an on-air presence? Clearly, if you're in a compromised situation, you're going to lose functionality. And so that's part of the exercise, is to say, well, if we do isolate in this particular thing to contain whatever, what goes away? Because as Daniel said, there's all automated processes and workflows that just happen, but they happen because of technology and networking. And you really need to understand that and how to quickly get in and out of that mode.
To add on to that, I've been through a couple, experiences where we've either, divested or brought certain businesses in. And when you start to try to separate those lines, you have this firewall connectivity between these businesses, and it's just a bunch of noise. It doesn't matter how big your organization is, how small it is. The network traffic, no one really knows what is there and why it's there. So you have to slowly start to back your way into understanding, okay, what is that traffic? What are the ports? Is it critical? And sometimes, to Roz's point, you just have to start turning the light switches off one by one to see what breaks and then be ready to jump back into it. And so it doesn't really matter what level you're at in terms of your organization. Those are some of the processes you follow, is that if you had to untangle that ball of Christmas lights, just go one by one until you get to that place where you have the minimum required services. And that starts to lead you down a path of some type of network segmentation, or some type of segmentation that allows you to either leverage the firewall or identity and things like that. And that'll really help from a risk mitigation perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So at this point, we've identified what our critical assets are that need to be protected. So Valisha, I'd like to reach out to you. If we've done that, and we're now looking at how we secure these against critical vulnerabilities, how do broadcasters identify the most critical vulnerabilities that need to be addressed? What are the priority vulnerabilities that need to be addressed? Could you weigh in a little bit on that with us, Valisha?
Sure. So I think really it comes down to risk, right? So if something is maybe identified as a high vulnerability, but there's a control in place for it, or a compensating control, then maybe it's not as great of a risk to your organization. The one thing with prioritization, like for example, in the CIS critical security controls, we have implementation groups. So we have IG 1, 2, and 3, and we really kind of help organizations prioritize implementation of the controls through those implementation groups, because I think it was maybe Daniel who said, like, you can't boil the ocean. And so when you're getting things, even, it applies the same in like vulnerability reports. When you're getting those scans results, you have to prioritize what is the biggest risk. And that kind of goes back to the assets, right? So if it's a high vulnerability that's on a critical asset, well, guess what? That's where you're going to drive your attention to. But if it's something that's not really powering anything critical and it's a high vulnerability, maybe you can get away with, putting it into your regular patch cycle. And again, it depends on the organization. It's not to say it's always the case, but it kind of really, it's tailoring, right? So you're not going to just put everything out at once. You're going to make sure when you actually implement the patch that you test it to make sure it's not going to bring something down, especially if it's on a critical server versus like a laptop that maybe has no sensitive information or does anything sensitive or critical to power the business. So
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Felicia. I'd like to turn to you, Brian, and ask a similar part of this question, which is there a short list of basic protections or best practices that you would recommend that need to be put in place now, so to speak?
Yeah, we actually, the FBI Cyber Division specifically just got done with something called Operation Winter Shield. And so what we did was over several months, we put out the specific key things that you can do for your network based on some of the investigations that we do and what we see. And so that's all available on the FBI's public website. But as a short list, that is kind of a good place to start. I think another thing that we'd mentioned here and was also mentioned in a previous presentation was the known exploited vulnerabilities list. So not only the ones that have been identified, but ones that we've seen cyber actors actually go after and exploit. And that's kind of a good way. I think those two things are a good place to start and actually kind of begin.
And for our broadcasters who may not be familiar with the known exploitabilities list, would you kind of let them know where to find
absolutely, that? Yeah, absolutely. So CISA maintains a database that contains all these known exploited vulnerabilities, which you can find on their website. It's referenced in plenty of different places, but it's easy to access on our website and easy to get started.
So, Roz, and would you like to kind of weigh in here from a broadcast perspective?
Yeah, sure. I think the patching and the vulnerability management is very critical. I like to say everything is a day zero, it feels like, because there's always something being released. So we obviously do the well, I shouldn't say obviously, maybe not everybody does this, but we do the Microsoft patching. We test it in the critical systems, then deploy it ASAP. But there's also third-party patching. So, your computer will have all sorts of other software on it that also has vulnerabilities. And really, you need to have a methodology to keep that constantly updated. And you probably see it, your web browser requires a reboot because it has a new patch. And that seems like it happens weekly or even more frequently than that. But managing all of that and understanding the threat, I think Felicia mentioned that is not all vulnerabilities are the same because of where they're at in the enterprise, but the more you can maintain and keep up with the vulnerabilities and make sure the reports are addressed, don't ignore stuff, right? You almost need you do need an automated scanning system that will tell you that, because there's not enough time in the day for people to actually do that manually. It has to have a service or a process for that.
Daniel?
Yeah, a couple notes that I've kind of been thinking about over the past couple weeks internally and within Scripps and within the industry and through this conversation is patching and vulnerability management is changing. So I think that as the groups that are listening think about their approach, I think you have to think about how AI is changing everything. So I'm going to go through a couple of tactical things that we do internally that I think are beneficial. Is we implemented, while we have the CVEs, we have the ratings that come out, we actually added another layer of what we call urgent vulnerabilities. Those are the ones that we believe are external facing, that they do have KVEs, we know they're being exploited in the wild, and we know that at the end of the day, since that asset's on the perimeter, and we know it's being used in the wild, and it provides some level of remote code execution or some type of elevated privileges, we want to get that SLA as small as possible, upwards of 12 to 24 hours. And so that's a really tough shift to make in an organization to try to get something patched within that short window, but it really gets you a couple steps ahead of the attacker. The other piece I would say is really focus on any systems that are regulated, right? So any of your PCI environments, any of your SOX environments, if you do payment processing, focus on those as well to think about how you prioritize and identify those. To piggyback though on what Roz said, I think the shift we're seeing, I personally think we're going to see, is the conversation between like my peer of Roz and myself from a security engineering perspective is building out the conversation about resiliency in cybersecurity. I think for years we've run into challenges of leveraging our security tools and our patching on that broadcast environment because of issues with outages and hardware failures or supporting issues. And I think over the next 6 to 12 months, we got to figure out a path in a partnership way to say how to become resilient to more real-time patching in that critical infrastructure that has to be elevated. How do we ensure our security tools are in place? And then how do we build that resiliency across the business and operations and engineering team so that they're just as resilient to the cybersecurity patches and tools as they are to internet outages, hardware failures, power outages. I mean, those are all things that we do today, and I think everyone who's listening probably has some backup plans there. Cyber has to be a part of that kind of expected resiliency moving forward.
Hey, Drew.
Yes, Alicia,
Sorry,
please
can
weigh
I
in.
just add
Yes.
one quick thing that I thought of while everyone was talking? So we didn't really talk about credentials or anything, and I know that's just because you can only fit so much in an hour, but I do want to touch on the importance of the credential piece of it, right? Identity and access control management is like huge, and I think it is a really quick win because it's something very simple to do. So these are things like making sure your passwords are changed and that they're not default credentials, or implementing MFA. And the other thing I'll mention too that I didn't in the first answer is that implementation group 1, we call that essential cyber hygiene. These are things like basic things that you should be doing, like the passwords, like the patching, the backups, and things like that. When it comes to prioritizing, right, starting with the basics first and then working your way up is incredibly important versus just trying to jump, head first and try to figure it out. So that's what I just wanted to add on that.
This panel is anticipating all of my questions, so this is outstanding. I really like the way that you all are interacting on this. I guess one of the things I'm curious about, and we were talking about this before in the back room, if we take a look at, for a small provider, are there any force multipliers, if you will, something that they can do that is easy to implement, that is going to make their life easier so that they can have resources available to implement the more difficult ones? Are there any recommendations you all have on that? And I'll start with you, Brian, and then we'll kind of work through the panel.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have much on the specificities, which I think the other panelists will be able to describe a little bit further. But I think as we talk about, at least from what the government's view on that is there's really good guidance, again, from CISA that's called Secure by Design, and it talks about requiring manufacturers to have things in there that are secure or by default, right? Meaning like it can't come out of the box with the same password as every other networking equipment that's out there, if that's what it is, and has to have encryption, has to have specific things to it that make it more secure. And so again, I think from our perspective, the way that we're trying to handle this is to try to, the government at least, is to try to create a better environment for those that are trying to procure equipment so that it's not as hard. But
yeah, we hear a lot about supply chain risk management. I guess what you're suggesting, here's one thing you can ask your vendors.
yeah, absolutely. And it gives some concrete things to say that these should be kind of just the baseline of security. And certainly it's something that you can say to a vendor, are you doing this? Because this is what I'm expecting.
Others?
Yeah, I'd like to just piggyback on that a little bit. What we've started to do recently is talking to vendors about, I'll call it appliances, boxes, broadcast equipment, and ask them, we prior didn't ask these kind of questions, how do you update your firmware? Are you keeping up with cyber risk, and how can we expect this to be current, where generally a box like that is purchased and they might look at updating firmware because of bug fixes or whatever. So that's one point. But I did want to get back to your question about what are some easy wins, and I would say multi-factor authentication where it's supported. Segmentation, I know we'll hear about that probably in better detail, but those are those are sort of table stakes. You don't want to forget endpoint protection, of course, and then jumping all the way over to the human side, and I think Wayne mentioned it in his presentation, is employee training. Because you can have all this stuff hardened and locked down, but if somebody is asked to open the front door and they're allowed in, it's kind of hard to maintain that. So you really need to have a little mix of all that. But those are, I think, are easy wins: MFA, segmentation, employee training, endpoint protection. That sort of thing needs to be in place, and I think that's relatively easy to do.
Yeah, I would say it's interesting is the awareness program sometimes gets not the best reputation for the phishing exercises, but I think on the security standpoint, you can consistently see where having the employee base, knowing who you are, how to get in touch with you, will end up saving you time. Maybe it doesn't stop the incident altogether, but it gives you a heads up so you can get in front of it. When I think about the force multiplier, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to do, but I would suggest is looking at how you build things from the beginning. Fix that initial build process. Use the right OS versioning. Make sure the right tools are in place. Make sure the right access control is in place. Build the network with the right firewall. If you start from today, anything new being built the right way, you'll have less rework to do, and you'll learn a lot about how you operate, so you can go fix the older stuff. So try not to fix everything at once. Start from the point of let's start building this the right way. One of the biggest things that we've been driving down for years in conversations in different industries is, in the cloud perspective, you can stand up, EC2 instances and AMIs that are old. And so what happens is you build these automations where these OS versions are years old, and you basically stand it up with thousands of vulnerabilities from day one, exposures. So all you're doing is you're setting yourself up for failure. So really look at that build process from workstations to laptops to servers to your cloud environment, and just keep that up to date, and you'll avoid a lot of the issues, or at least building up that backlog.
Felicia, did you want to weigh in on this? Did you have any additional
Yeah.
comments?
Sure. So I had mentioned implementation groups. It's a great way to prioritize what you're trying to implement. When it comes to controls, I think anyone in the room would not disagree that you cannot do them all at once. There's times where certain organizations may take years to implement a set of controls just based on the risks or the resources that they have available to them. But that's why I like the implementation groups, because it sort of bites off things in little small sections that you can actually are attainable and achievable. And so it's based on the risk profile that is, the organization is facing. The other thing too is that I will say when you go to select your controls, right, it should be boiling down to risk. And so if, for example, a control is going to cost $1 million to implement, but say it only your business only generates $500,000 in income, then maybe it's not actually reasonable to implement that control. So you really have to look at the risk profile plus, basically the value that it's going to bring you, and balance that when you're prioritizing. And then once you actually implement the controls, or any set of controls, doesn't have to be the CIS controls, of course, making sure that you keep on top of them, right? So controls are a cyclical thing. Once you implement them, you assess them, reassess, mitigate more. It just kind of goes on and on. It doesn't just stop after the first implementation.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. We've talked about a couple different things here, and Felicia, you brought up the idea of basic cyber hygiene, and we've talked about, password changes, patching, et cetera, et cetera. Is there any other suggestions that you could give broadcasters to help them to keep up with the pace of patching, also with just keeping track of how often, what are the good rules of thumb as far as changing passwords? Is there something that you can offer in that space that you might want to share?
I would say when you're thinking about access controls and passwords fall into that, your passwords and MFA are great. I would also look at the access that you're allowing, the conditional access. So thinking about your your O365 environment or whatever your email environment is, and ensuring that, not only do you have the password and MFA, which is great, but, I think that is still pretty weak when it comes to the threats these days. So making sure that, how do you also ensure that the asset that they're coming in from is trusted? It doesn't necessarily have to be an enterprise asset per se, but how do you deploy some type of handshake, some type of cert, some type of validation that this mobile device, this iPad or laptop is the person behind it? How do you verify that identity just a little bit further? I think that goes a long way in building out some of the protections.
Yeah, I'll throw in there too that one of the things that we see a lot is that organizations are compromised through third parties. So making sure that the third parties are also adhering to the requirements that you have. A lot of times, even when we talk about cloud infrastructure, understanding what their security posture is, as well as those other third-party vendors that you may allow access to your system, because you can do as much as you want for your systems, but if you can't control everything in that, it's kind of a moot point.
Just to add, I think from a threat intelligence perspective, we've seen that the attackers are shifting more away from attacking you directly into your suppliers, right? Because if they can get into a third party that has access to 1,000 customers versus just you, there's a lot more value there. So the concern I have when I'm talking to our critical vendors from a broadcast or from an enterprise perspective is, what are you doing to stay in front of the 0 days, and how are you self-assessing, and how are you patching that? And I think on top of what Brian said is, you have to look at the access you're giving them. How are they remoting in? How are they connecting in? Do they have a server in your DMZ? Do they have credentials? Do they have laptops? Really looking at those ways they're coming in, because if they have a compromise on their side, what's that movement over to your side to protect?
It's interesting. You also had a mention of network segmentation before, and I think I'd like to pull that thread with you all a little bit, because supply chain, network segmentation, these other things are actually related in terms of how you're pulling together your overall network. So we were talking in the back room about that a little bit. If you'd like to kick us off, Roz, that'd be great.
Yeah, on the segmentation piece, I mean, it feels like that's something that's been around forever, but I have seen folks that don't really take that all that seriously. But it's not just access control lists. I mean, you really need to have a firewall type of a rule set that you can get down to. I think Daniel said as start shutting things off and ports and whatever it is, and you only have the minimum required access, and of course managing the authentication. Who is this, and are they trusted? Don't trust anything unless you can validate that trust. The more you can lock that stuff down and monitor the traffic and know if something is changing. I think Wayne mentioned something along those lines, is some monitoring that knows where there's a difference. If credentials seem to be being used that aren't typical or shouldn't be trying, then something's going on in your environment. But I think the segmentation, I believe, is you almost have to. And going back to Brian's point about third party, that's a real thing. You have to have a trusted partnership with your other entities that they will be willing to tell you, hey, we have something going on, and we want to let you know and work it out so that they can then go back into a more trusted connectivity state, if I can say it that way.
I think Roz hit it great there. One thing I'll add to that is that the other thing that segmentation does for you, if you can get it down correctly, is it gives you one little funnel point, right? At a certain point, if you have everything connected and it's not segmented, it's like a highway versus a tunnel where you can monitor one thing, potentially spend less money, and also be more effective with your resources too before. But I think everything that Roz said was awesome.
I think there's also various ways to look at network segmentation. I think at the default, you think about the firewall rules, which is the easiest way to get to that tunnel. But there's a lot of conversation about what does zero trust mean. And I've had this dialogue with my network security team in the past about, well, why don't we focus just on zero trust? And that path is really challenging to get to a real type of zero trust implementation. So if you look at this in terms of how do I start to segment the access to these pieces, firewall may be one piece of it. You may set up different domains and domain trusts to help that. Your access controls are really important. So thinking about least privileges of user accounts so that if something does get compromised on an asset or a user account, they don't have the permissions to move over in that area. So you have to find that balance between what works best for you and your organization and what capabilities you have. The other tactical thing I'll add is I think deception tactics are a little underused. I think there's a lot of value there for organizations that don't have as much investment or maturity in the cyberspace. Setting up honeypot accounts and just setting them out there, having folders and servers set up that at the end of the day, if they get touched or if they get used, that should be your immediate alarm to say we've got an issue. And so I think those are somewhat underused. And sometimes the attackers they're not thinking that far ahead. They even set up a fake trusted domain and call it something that's your company name and then have your real domain name something very vague. They're going to go towards the one that seems likely versus not. And so there's a lot of ways to do deception to help you make sure you're looking for an attack or an incident.
And I'll just.
No, go ahead.
Sorry,
Go
Drew.
ahead. Go ahead, Felicia.
I was just going to add that I completely agree with what Daniel just said. So I don't know if it was Target or Home Depot breach where they had named the self-checkout kiosks as such, and then the attackers went right for those. So I think deception techniques are definitely very helpful. The other thing to keep in mind is, just what does the function serve, and do you want that tied to your corporate network or the broadcast control systems? Like, where do you want to draw the lines in the sand? A lot of times I've seen in my experience when I did forensics and incident response, it would never fail. One person would open an email and take the entire network down. And I don't know if anyone remembers the Emotet days. And that was just like a very wild time, because every time one person would click on an email or open up a bad web link, and then all of a sudden their entire network would be hosed, and it was like wildfire. So yeah, I cannot stress network segmentation enough.
No, I just wanted to say about the honeypot and all this other stuff that goes back to Brian's earlier comment about think like a threat actor. And I think that seems weird, but yeah, look at all your stuff as what would I do, or how could I compromise this, and kind of go backwards from that.
So the other thing I think you mentioned as well is the protections between these different objects, like the idea of endpoint protection, things of that nature. So this is great the way this is all tying together. We've got good discussion about identity and access controls management. We've talked about the protections, the filtering between the different pieces, and all of these things feed into the plan of what you're trying to do with network segmentation, leading to the basics of a zero trust, as you mentioned. So thank you for bringing those up. I'd like to actually then kind of turn and say, okay, we've gone through and discussed a lot of the different aspects of cybersecurity in the broadcasting realm. And I'd like to open this up to each of you, and in no particular order, so feel free to chime in whenever you want, Felicia. I'd like to open it up to you. Okay, we've talked about all these topics. What have we not talked about? What would you like us to make sure that the broadcasters today leave with, oh, that's another great idea, and or is it something we covered that you'd like to reinforce? And we can do one each, and we'll just cycle through. So start with you, Ross.
I'll just say, go briefly, automation, and have approved ways that activity can happen automatically, because this sort of threat environment is super fast, and as long as you understand what you allow to happen automatic and contain that, and some stuff needs to be approved by a human, but the more you can automate that, because I think it plays into Daniel's thing about AI and all this other stuff happening. It's happening too fast, really, for humans to keep up with. So I think we have to look at automating some of these protection activities.
I'm going to go back to my resiliency conversation. The speed of which attacks are going to surface, be used against us in the next 12 to 24 months is going to continue to grow. I think we're already seeing that from a vulnerability perspective, the amount of 0 days and kind of quote unquote 0 days that are being released by different software vendors. So this conversation between you and your technical peers and your leadership team needs to happen today about how do you guys drive resiliency to ensure that the security tools are there, that the vulnerability patching is there, and find a way to start acting in real time. The days of waiting to investigate or confirm a potential cyber incident is kind of going to go away. So we have to be able to be resilient to contain assets and networks faster, understand the risk of that, be resilient against that, then do the investigation, then step back and maybe undo those items. So I think we really do have to have a conversation about moving faster from the defense to the response to the patching.
Mine is actually also about automation, but in a different perspective. We focus all the time on function, like you probably heard me say a lot about that today, but I want to take it back to, 50 to 70 years ago, there was no automation at all, and we were still able to get these things to function. Now, I don't mean to say that we shouldn't automate things. They obviously make things much better, at least your functions. But I think there's a balance, and you need to be thinking about the fact that as these devices are able to do more, that if they're only able to do it through a digital means, that they're taking some things away from you too, right? Because if an actor were able to access that same device, they can do the same things that you can do. So again, thinking from that actor's perspective, there's a balance between the two, and always be thinking about that has kind of been our message for a long time.
Interesting.
I'll take a
Felicia?
slightly different approach
Thank you.
in governance, right? Governance and process and planning. And I cannot stress enough that having a plan at a minimum, even if you do nothing else, is better than just running around with your hair on fire. Governance should be step one, right? To have a policy, have a standard, have something that you're holding your teams accountable for, because at the end of the day, if you don't have the buy-in at the top for those policies, you can write policies all day long, and it's probably not going to help. So having that really ingrained in what you're doing and have that be the crux of it, and then go from there is super important.
Yeah, thank you. I have just two quick comments to make. I believe you should have a policy. I think for small broadcasters, it feels like, well, that's a lot of paperwork and a lot of trouble. But I think it also plays into the business as far as proving that you are insurable. There's a business case for having that, and there's some value to it. I feel like a great policy, very detailed, but then have a quick start guide. I'm the guy that unboxed something from the store, and I don't read the manual. I just may not even read the quick start, but that at least gives me the high level so you can execute. And then one thing I did want to mention I should have is restoration. I know you have another presentation after this, but if you don't test your backups, if you don't know how it works, you do not want to find that out during a recovery of some sort. You want to be very confident that you've got immutable backups for a certain period of time and whatever, and then hold back from a broadcast engineer's point of view of restore immediately. Let that be guided and communicated and very clear what to do and how to restore it, but know it will work.
Two thoughts. On what Felicia said is the plan is important. I think part of the importance of the plan is that everyone knows who makes the decision. When you get to a situation where things are on fire, you don't want to look around for someone to make a decision. You want to know who that is, who's accountable for it, and who's going to make the call to either turn something off, shut things down, go off air, partially, whatever that might be. So really flesh out those decision makers and ensure they're empowered to make those decisions quickly, so that you can be effective.
Fantastic. This has been some great feedback. We talked about these critical assets, and in my background, we used to refer to them as the crown jewels. And once you understand those crown jewels and where they reside, you're a step forward in terms of what do I need to protect, how do I protect it, and when something happens to it, how do I repair it and get it back into service? So this is all very good guidance. We're coming closer to time, and I know that they're going to start waving flags at me to end, but I'd like to actually go one more time around and ask you the question from the past, which is, what do you wish you learned earlier in your career that might help these broadcasters, these small, mid-sized broadcasters, to get started in this or to move their plan and their program forward? What is an early lesson? And we'll start with you, Dan.
Don't bite off more than you can chew, right? I think at the end of the day, there's probably people listening to this that are thinking I'm so far behind. Just choose one or two things that are the most important and go tackle those, and then just come up with your plan over the next 2 years. What are you going to do quarter by quarter to get those things done? I think you can get really excited and eager to go fix all these things, and then you run into the prioritization issue. The business still has to run. You still got to, improve the customer experience.
I would say with any business resiliency, it's not just a technical problem. It is a business challenge. And so that means there's all the players have to be in the room, and they have to realize they all have skin in the game, and they have to understand the consequences of some sort of reduced functionality through whatever it may be. It may be a fire, hurricane, or cyber, but they do need to understand what needs to happen and what that means and how the recovery looks. So I feel like years ago I thought things were just technical, and technology will solve it, but it's really communications and everything that goes with the business.
I don't know if I have much to say about what I would do, but I think one thing that we see often is, again, people regretting not getting in the same room and talking prior to an incident. I know that we've kind of harped on that a lot, but I seeing the other end of it when somebody is in a crisis and having an incident response that they have to work out, it really is, man, we should have done this earlier. We should have talked about this. That's all it takes, just getting people in a room to be able to start that.
Felicia?
Yeah, I agree. I would definitely say the two themes that I would go with are don't try to boil the ocean, and also along the lines of communication, ask for help. It doesn't have to mean that's just internal, right? There's external resources available. Some are free, some are paid. But don't be afraid and don't think that this is just your problem to solve, because it's definitely takes a village, both internally and externally. I think about like when incidents strike, even the communication piece comes heavily with public relations, right? Because there's many times where you have an incident and then all of a sudden, I mean, this is probably the audience to say it to, is like you're on the news and then all of a sudden you don't want to be that next headline. So having that communication plan locked tight early on is very important.
Actually, Felicia, I wanted to go back to something you had said before when we were talking about cyber hygiene. You brought that up, and you talked about identity management. And we've talked a lot about changing passwords and multi-factor authentication as well. I'm just curious what your take is. There's been some comments made in the past around passports or passwords are so passé, but there's different things like a passphrase versus a password and multi-factor authentication. What has your experience within CIS community? Where do you land on that, the idea of a passphrase, and maybe explain to these broadcasters what that means and why it's better than a password?
Yeah, so your typical password is usually something that's complex and has numbers and characters and all the different features of a password. A passphrase is a little bit different. So they're longer, so they probably have they have more entropy, which means that it's just harder to crack. And so actually, if you put in, there's lots of tools out there. You can put in your password or a password, similar one, to see how long it would take to crack, just to kind of get an idea of like where you stand with your passwords. But beyond that, we really push on the multi-factor authentication, because that is really the most important thing you can do beyond just passwords, right? Because passwords are kind of becoming a thing of the past. They're still obviously super important in use, but now you'll see when you're on your different websites, like you can have password lists and biometrics and all these other things, and obviously anything you can do more than just a password is incredibly helpful. But yeah, and there's a lot of guidance out there on all the passwords. We actually have a password guide that I can share with the audience.
Fantastic, thank you. Are there any other resources, suggestions you have for the broadcaster community that they might find things specific to what they're trying to do? We mentioned, of course, the known vulnerability list. You've mentioned CIS's content. We obviously have content on the FCC website, but are there any other resources you might want to recommend to broadcasters specifically?
Yeah, well, go ahead, Ross. I was going to say, I'd just pitch for at least the FBI side, if you can get in contact with your local FBI office and build a relationship, because if something does happen, and we are coming out there, it's better to know us beforehand, know what we're going to ask, what we don't want, what we do need, so that it's not a surprise if something were to happen. So.
That's a great preparation, but people need to know who to call, so to speak, for who you're going to call, right?
Yeah, for broadcasters specifically, Wayne Pacina that did the presentation prior would be a good reminder that the Society of Broadcast Engineers has quite a laundry list of webinars that are available on this subject and other things that if you are new to that sort of thing, it would kind of give you a really good start on understanding some of the things for, from the basics to the more complex. I would recommend it. It's easy and obtainable.
I'll end with just working with your peers in the industry, big and small. I think we're, from a security perspective, we're all eager to talk about what we're seeing and supporting each other. There's, media entertainment ISACs out there that you can join. There's, broadcast associations you can join to have cyber groups. So just get connected with the industry and where they're sharing info and ask questions.
Drew, I just wanted to quickly add, so CIS is a nonprofit. We offer a lot of free and obviously we have paid resources as well and services. But you'd mentioned the ISACs, so Information Sharing and Analysis Center, and I really think they're a wealth of information. So we actually have the MS-ISAC, which is a multi-state, and I checked some of the broadcasters, I believe from the tribes, might be eligible. So it's something to look into. But on the side of free resources, we have a ton on our website. But one of the things that might be helpful for the audience is the policy templates that we published. So they're free to download, but you could take them and then customize them for your own organization. And it's just a jump start to get you, where you need to be for the policy side.
Okay. Wow, that's a lot to take in, and just a one quick hour. You can see why we were so excited to have this group of experts here to join us today to talk a little bit about what some best practices they've done and what they would recommend for you all. I hope you found this very helpful. Join me in thanking our esteemed panelists for sharing these valuable insights and how they employ them today and what you can do to be better prepared to respond to this volatile cyber threat environment. Turning it back over to you, George. Thank you.
I want to echo what Drew said. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks for the great discussion. As we've heard from our great panel, there are a lot of available and scalable practices that you can take now to mitigate the risk to your organization. And so we appreciate your perspective so very much. We're going to take another break. We'll come back at 12:45. And again, if you need to use restrooms, they are out the back doors to the left and right. We'll see you at 12:45. Welcome back. Please be seated. It's time for our third session, preparing for and responding to a cyber attack. I'd like to introduce Luke Demboski and Dave Wong, both experts in advising clients on cyber response and response planning. Luke is a partner at Debevoise and Plimpton. He co-chairs the firm's Global Strategy and Security Group and is experienced advisor to clients on cybersecurity risk management, response, and investigations. Dave is a director at Mandiant, which is now part of Google Cloud. His team helps companies respond to cyber attacks and bolster their resilience. Dave's personal experience in investigating cyber attacks provides him with insight into attacker methods, which he leverages to guide companies in strengthening their defenses. Take it away, Luke and Dave. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George, and thank you to the Commission for having us for this important session. Really enjoyed the chance to hear the earlier panels, and what we're going to try to do is build off of that. Maybe just a word about our respective roles and how we intersect with the topic. So I'm a lawyer at a law firm, a global firm, and you might ask, well, what do lawyers have to do with cyber? And it turns out quite a bit. Yes, much of it is in the technical trenches, but so much of it has to do with what you say, what you disclose, notifications, the way you make risk decisions has legal, regulatory, and other consequences for the organization. And so I started my career as a litigator, much of it as a prosecutor for the Justice Department, and now 10 years advising companies. And one of our closest partners in the trenches of incident response is Mandiant, now part of Google. So over to you, Dave.
Sure. Thank you for that, Luke. I'm Dave Wong, and like Dave said, I'm in the technical trenches. On the incident response side, where we're oftentimes in a knife fight against bad actors, that have broken into companies, and after the fact, these victims call us for help. Sometimes it's to try to understand what happens, and we're doing deep, IT forensics on systems. Other times it's an active attacker, which makes things more challenging because now it's how do we stop this and contain the bleeding, and I think Luke, like you said, where we connect is these cyber attacks. As many of you know, is no longer a technology issue that you work with a chief information security officer or a CIO with, but they have significant impacts on the business, as well as for some organizations like yourselves, the general public as well too, right? So what can we do to better help our victims prepare for attacks and respond for attacks is something that I spend a lot of time with.
So if you're a technical person listening to this, that's great. But if you're a business, legal, or risk or compliance person, much of what we say is going to pertain to you, because this really truly is a team sport in terms of response across functions. And it may seem discouraging to read about cyber incident after cyber incident. I think a lot of people read things like about Canvas, the education platform, being commandeered by one of the prolific ransom data extortion groups out there today. And it's just the latest, almost one per day or every other day sensational type of attack that can make many of us feel like it's a no-win situation. But I think what we've both realized over the course of our careers is that patterns of this going well or not well emerge, and we can take lessons and common themes from the different incidents over the years. And there are ways to manage these quite successfully and dramatically reduce the impact. And that's a lot of what we're going to get into. We have a slide deck. I'm going to go ahead and put that up with Zoe's help here. And so let's back up one. There we go. Slight delay, but we're there. We're going to start with an overarching discussion of the threat trends that are relevant to preparation and response. And our work, of course, is not specific to broadcast or media or even communications sector in general. It includes that, but it's cross sectors. And so what we see is a threat actor or threat group will try the same schemes across different verticals. And they often do a campaign because they'll find that, say broadcasters use a particular type of tool, a particular technology or vendor, and they can run that playbook against them across the sector if they're successful initially. But a lot of those came from other sectors. And so we'll bring to you here our knowledge of those. One of the headlines, Dave, that we wanted to bring to the group's attention is everyone hears about ransomware. What is ransomware versus a data extortion type case?
Yeah, so you've heard of these ransomware attacks where companies have been taken offline because their systems have been locked up, right? So what the attackers are doing is they're putting in software, malicious software that they created put it on victims' networks, and then use that as a way to lock up systems. And initially what they were doing was they were doing that as a way to force and extort a company to pay a ransom, and that's where the term came from. So that was something that we saw maybe a decade ago. It initially started at on your personal computers, where you might get a pop-up, and then all your photos that grandma had of grandchildren were locked up, and they were small amounts, a few $100s here and there. And I think what we saw was that the attackers have learned over time that if they go after companies, particularly ones that provide critical business services, they're much more willing to pay. And so we saw that change. But I think just to tee you up, Luke, I think we more recently seen other things beyond just ransomware used for extortion.
Yeah, because ransomware, as you said, implies malware or malicious code to lock up systems, but we're seeing less of that. It's still a big risk, and it's a particular risk for broadcasters because you can't really be down, right? You have very little tolerance or ability to be completely down. Your bread and butter is, to be available to communicate ongoing, and so that kind of disruptive attack is significant. But the higher threat situation that we see are data extortion cases. There's been a proliferation of different groups of varying degrees of sophistication and a bit of a land grab, if you will, for more turf. So where they find a vulnerability or they are able to fool somebody and trick someone, we're going to unpack that because that's the most common thing we see, is the human aspect of this. They will get in and use that user's credentials to access a file share or other data repository and take a swath of data that's then used to extort the company. Unless you pay us, we're going to publish this on our shaming site on the dark web, which you can't readily take down. And a lot of companies, realize it could be their sensitive HR or customer personal data. It could be proprietary plans, pricing, sensitive contracts, and they don't want that data out there. So many of them end up paying. Another trend, Dave, that you and I have talked about that we're seeing is where there isn't encryption, these same smash and grab data extortion groups are using individual harassment as another leverage point. Could you say a word about that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, some of these threat actors are very financially motivated. So I don't think they necessarily care how, but they're trying different things. And initially it was encrypting and locking up systems, right? So that was the initial ransomware. We talk about like double extortion, where they ransom your systems and then they steal your data because you don't want that information exposed, right, Luke? It could be emails, it could be very sensitive information. But the third technique that some of the groups, and not all of the groups, do is they'll start harassing executives and their family members, and it becomes very personal at that point, right? Where somebody that might not pay a ransom when they have a path to recover their systems, if they feel their life is in danger, or worse yet, a close family member, it kind of changes that dynamic. So we've seen some of that happen, and luckily so we've also seen law enforcement react to that as well too.
Right, and most of the cases haven't involved violence, a few, but they've involved harassing texts to people's children or their spouse, for example. They've involved sending flowers or something else to the home. We know where you live. We can reach you. Recently, we have seen a troubling trend by a couple groups of swattings where they spoof a call from the home and elicit a response from the local police SWAT team, which surrounds the house, and it's a very scary and dangerous situation for family members. And so that's a troubling trend. So part of what we're going to talk about is, what does that mean for your prep? What does it mean for reducing your personal just preparation, reducing surface area? For example, is it fine for me just to list my family members' names and cell phones and maybe even other personal data in my work Outlook contacts? Is that a good idea? Or should I use a little bit of operational security around that? Some people maybe change the names of those people or keep it in a separate personal device so that when a threat group gets in there, they can't readily just immediately go at your contacts and terrorize your family. Another trend are impersonations from and to help desks. A lot of them have been impersonating the help desk and calling a user. This is the most common thing that we're seeing in our world, is the threat group may even hit an individual user or group of them with a load of spam and then wait a few minutes, half hour or whatever, and call those people and say, hey, we're the company's IT help desk. We saw that you got hit with this spam. It's because you don't have a particular setting on your computer. Or they may not do the spam and just say, we need to make an emergency, time-sensitive fix to your PC. We're going to remote in, we're going to send you a prompt. And if that's been blocked by the organization, and I hope if it's not a tool that they use, that they do block and only permit the ones that they officially use, then they'll lure the person to a site that looks like a site of the company, and they'll have them log in, and it looks like an official login, and the password and multi-factor are all dotted out, but they're really getting that, and they're adding then a device pivoting into the network and taking data used to extort the company. So if we can go back to the deck real quick. That's a big one, and then calls to the help desk as well. There's a couple groups where nearly all of their attacks have come through fooling the help desk. I'm a user, I lost my device, it's an emergency, I have this big deal, or I've got to do this project, it's very time sensitive, can you send me a new token to this device or phone? Some of our clients have actually started escalating those full, not just password reset, but token or multi-factor authentication reset, take it up out of the help desk and escalate it to the person's manager, as a way, because how often does somebody lose everything, like their whole device? It's not a common kind of situation, or it shouldn't be. Dave, I wondered if you could speak to the AI-related cyber risks, because this has been a big headline in our world recently.
Yeah, so AI's been a big headline everywhere recently. Certainly in cybersecurity. I feel it's a two-edged sword, because there are a lot of opportunities with AI. Like we've seen people use AI for some groundbreaking things in medical research, for example. And I'm very bullish on the positive aspects of AI. But with all things, put in the hands of the wrong people, there can be bad outcomes, right? And so at Google, we've been tracking hackers attempt to use AI for a lot of different things. From code generation, from sending phishing emails, from automating, beginning to end, their attacks that sometimes would have taken them weeks, they could launch at 15 companies all at once within hours, right? So the sheer velocity and scale of some of these AI attacks and tools is obviously very disruptive. There were a lot of people on the previous panel on the other side of that, right? Which, how do you defend against an AI attack? And if it's coming at you and you're trying to prioritize vulnerability management and patching and all these things, I think it creates a challenge in terms of resourcing and timing. Our sort of prediction on our side is, like, I don't think you can throw enough bodies or money at that problem unless you're leveraging AI on your side as well too. So it's probably something that's a little bit controversial, but we think leveraging AI is probably the best way to fight fire with fire.
Right, and we'll cover as well some ways to just reduce your surface area, reduce the risk on the defensive side by minimizing data, more segmentation around key data sets to make it harder to get at if we're going to assume that AI is going to find a way at some point. So the last point we had, and then we'll dive into the individual slides from the overview here, is on nation-state activity. We've seen a convergence of nation-states using traditional tradecraft, which could include recruiting insiders, including IT insiders, to just straight-up hacking activity. A lot of times it's been infiltrating a supply chain, so doing some diligence on your suppliers. If you're a broadcaster that's dependent on a particular vendor or type of code, just to at least have gone through some type of diligence at a basic level or have done some research. And maybe you don't have the resources to do that with every vendor, but they categorize your vendors based on risk and go from there. So why don't we go ahead? All right. There we go. All right. Developments in ransom cases. I can start off here, Dave, and then
Sure.
if you can chime in. So we covered a little bit of this. There's newer groups, so there's less predictability. Like, remember the days of Conti and even before them, Maze. And these were predominantly Eastern European groups in terms of their origins and leadership. And that's changed a lot. We're seeing, the gaming set in the West now involved. So much less predictability for our clients. There's less maturity. A lot of the Western groups are more juvenile. Some of them are actually juveniles that are participating in this. And they're, in some ransom cases we've had, you kind of have to wait for them to get out of school so you can pick up the negotiation in the afternoon. It's a sad commentary on that state of things. And because they're in the West, the positive thing is they're much more likely to get arrested, and a number of them have been. And it's very sad for them because they're so bright and they've got these technical skills. And my little public service announcement, if they're watching, is do something constructive with your life. Don't spend it in prison, or at least a big chunk of it in prison because you did something foolish like this. They're blessed with tremendous skills and they could earn a living. And so what it's meant for clients is a lot less predictability. If you thought, well, we've got cyber insurance, if we're hit in a ransom case, we could just pay the ransom and it'll be fine. It's much less predictable, the outcome. These groups often don't keep their word, the newer ones especially. They will say they deleted data and frequently are found that they didn't delete the data after all. They kept it or pawned it off on the side. And there's a sanctions risk to payment as well from a legal standpoint. And if you don't know who you're dealing with, where they are, what money facilities and locations in the world they're using, you could run into a sanctions issue. We talked about harassment. Dave, in terms of the volatility of these groups, they may be less sophisticated, but AI may level them up a bit and give them different ways to cause mayhem.
Yeah, I mean, they're technically maybe they're less sophisticated, but I think in terms of the attacks, they're resourceful. So they'll leverage AI tools to crawl your website and learn about individuals that they're going to phish. So if you look at some of these phishing emails that get sent out, like gone are the days where you see a bunch of spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, right? In their extortion letters, there's very detailed information about the terabytes of information that normally would have taken anybody weeks, months to figure out, but they're going through that data and they're using AI tools to identify, hey, we've got this really sensitive piece of information that I know is worth a lot of money to you, and using that in their calculus for for extorting victims. So we've certainly seen AI tools like help them with with each stage of that extortion and that life cycle. I think the other thing I want to bring up on the unpredictability part, Luke, is there used to be a time where you would consider paying a ransom, and you had some assurance. You never had 100%, but you had some assurance that hacker's probably going to go away. Now you don't because of that unpredictability part of it, and so I think executives are much more cautious about paying because now if you do, besides the sanctions risk, Luke, right? There's like, are they going to come back at you? Are they going to sell that data again? And it might not be them, right? Because there's like loose correlations amongst these individuals, amongst like multiple hacker groups. So if it's ransom group A that hit you the first time, the person knows that you may pay the next time. So ransom group C that his friend is might come after you. So I think it does create a lot of challenges and on the business side, not on the technical side, on how do you respond.
All right, we'll skip ahead here. I want to make sure we have a lot of time for what a good response looks like, and including outside of technical. So we're going to really spend most of our focus there. Really quickly on national security, you might say, why does it matter? If we're hit, we're hit. A cyber attack is a cyber attack. It actually matters in a couple ways. The motivation of the attacker, their identity links to their methods, their tactics, do they stay persistent for a long time in the environment? Are they a one-trick pony that just socially engineers, grabs data and gets out? Not that you would take for granted that they wouldn't change in that case, but it would give certainly direction to your investigation and response if you understand the nature of what hit you and what the motivation is behind it. And so part of that is, I can't emphasize this enough, how valuable it is to report to law enforcement. For the U.S. broadcasters reporting to the FBI, we just find it so valuable. Might have heard stories in the past, well, they'll come in and try to take over, or they'll press us for stuff, or it'll leak out. And we just have not seen that in today's FBI. It's gotten so good over the years in terms of their sharing information proactively with our clients, with us. Hey, you think it's this group, that what you've described to us definitely aligns with them. Here's what else to look for. Or we're not aware of a sanctions issue. Here's some other considerations for your response and so forth. So it can be very valuable. I also think there's an expectation now among your customers, your stakeholders, to do the right thing and not go it alone. That an organization that kind of buries the fact of an incident, doesn't go to the authorities, doesn't make a report, has kind of chosen to isolate themselves, and it's not a good look, and it's riskier than it needs to be. Real quick, of course, many would say that China has kind of become the number one cyber rival of the U.S., maybe surpassing Russia. What we tend to see there is it's not ransoms, it's about, learning about critical infrastructure, maybe possibly intercepting communications or being able in a future conflict to disrupt communications or provide misinformation, that sort of thing. The ones I want to call out, and Dave chime in here, is, Iran has majored in cyber mischief in the past. People are familiar with their denial of service against the U.S. financial sector, 12 years or so ago. And now with the war, they've lashed out against some U.S. companies, including Stryker, and it's been about destructive attacks on companies.
Yeah, I think this is where motivations matter, Luke, and it matters for us on the technical and the defensive side because it tells us where we need to look at and protect. But if you look at Iran and maybe even North Korea as well too, where some of the motivations are not criminal in nature, right? Like as opposed to like the ransomware groups, where they're going to steal data and you kind of expect an extortion. We see disruptive attacks like we saw during the Ukraine war, for example, attacks against communications because they were trying to disrupt communications between emergency services, for example, like in the Ukraine. That was well documented, an area of concern. One thing Iran has been doing on social media side is influence operations as well too, right? So you think about from a political standpoint, if they're able to get into broadcasters and send messages out to public, whether to change their minds or just to cause panic and fear and mayhem, there are different reasons why those threat actors might target this group, and I think when we think about the threat actors, there's how they do it, why they do it, and then what resources they have as well too. And I think when we're thinking about nation states versus criminal actors, a criminal actor is generally going to be more opportunistic. They might find a 0-day vulnerability, or they might have a phishing technique, and they're just going to spray the internet looking for victims and then see who they can get to pay money. But with the nation states, they tend to be much more targeted. They're looking for specific people that they can conduct espionage against, right? Or disrupting critical infrastructure, and they have a lot of resources as well too. So when I think about previous attacks that we've seen against communications firms, for example, it was quite sophisticated malware that they used on networking equipment and devices that you wouldn't normally see from a criminal actor.
Right, and Iran historically has shown a lot of interest in targeting media, even from a espionage standpoint, to try to understand what's going to be published and so forth. And so you combine that with the penchant for destructive attacks. The FBI has warned many companies recently that they're being targeted. It's an example of great work by the Bureau, moving, if you will, left of boom to warn people that they're targeting you. Many people read about Stryker having devices wiped, medical services provider, and that is the kind of thing. And all of this is setting the stage for the meat of what we want to spend time on here, which is how to prepare for these. I think we've effectively covered the Iran pieces, so we can jump ahead. AI, just a couple other things. People have been reading about AI as a tool of attackers, but there's also your own use as a company of AI. So we're finding that just blanket banning AI use can kind of backfire because people will go out and use it on the side. So it becomes like a shadow IT kind of issue, and then company data or things they need for work goes into a public version of ChatGPT or Claude or another tool. I know Gemini's your favorite, being from Google. But whatever the tool may be, being very thoughtful about the fact that this can really help people, but let's put some guardrails around it rather than just like a blanket prohibition has been problematic from our experience. We see a lot of situations where people rush to capitalize and they move data sets around from a structured, well-protected situation to an analytics platform that's less protected, different integrations, or they're using something like Microsoft Copilot and they haven't thought about, do they want all of their meetings recorded? Do they just want summary transcripts? Do they only want to keep them for a period? What about like the fact that this stuff could be discoverable for a long time afterwards? The message here is less for the technical teams and more for leadership. Put your, insert yourself, put your nose into these discussions, ask, what are we doing in terms of AI? And if we've got vendors who are integrating AI into their tools, what questions are we asking them about their governance around it? So against broadcasters, we talked about the fact that you really can't easily be down. Certainly at the station level, the mothership pushing content and updates out to the various stations in the field can maybe incur some downtime, and perhaps programming could be repeated and so forth. But it really is such a key part of minute-by-minute infrastructure that the stakes are high. I don't know if you could say a word on what that means for crisis response.
Yeah, I mean, for crisis response and preparation, and I think we've learned a lot from different industries as well too, right? So if you look at like banking, it's not the same problem, but if the trading systems are down, it's very problematic and very costly for them, right? Or we've worked in environments like manufacturing, for example, where if a pharmaceutical cannot make drugs for months, it causes real issues, to the public. And so, I think the lessons that we can learn from that is essentially how do we isolate our systems, right? Like I think that's going to be a key thing. And then also, if we don't have access to our emails or some of our key IT systems, can we still continue to broadcast? And I think that's part of some of the preparation things that Luke and I will talk about later. Yep.
All right. So what does it look like? And definitely take note of the fact that some broadcasters are going to be very small, in size. So the importance is no less. They're playing a critical function. The business depends on how they respond and react, but they may not have all these different layers. And so we'll speak broadly about the variations of this. But I mean, Dave, we tend to divide the world into, routine events or incidents and non-routine. And so even if you're small, if it's something that's non-routine, how do we escalate? Who do we bring in? We hopefully have good monitoring in place to understand our baseline. Just if you analogize to your health, you go into your doctor, well, your blood pressure is usually in this range and now it's elevated, or something else has changed from the baseline. So understanding the baseline network environment, there are incident response plan, which doesn't have to be a big dissertation. It can be a couple of pages with a flow chart of if it's this, or this, we're going to escalate. A lot of it has been set to confirming disaster, which I would humbly submit is too late. It has to be triggered, the escalation, to others, to your leaders, to outside support help vendors like Mandiant, has to be based on the suspicion of something potentially bad happening, not confirmation of badness. Every breach response lawyer like myself in the world could probably have a bumper sticker that say, if only IT and InfoSec had told me earlier, you know. And much of our many situations we come into, we find out that IT knew about something days before, and they, didn't escalate it, and they waited till it was a confirmed disaster. So can you say a word, Dave, about, like, in your incident response plan, like, what the teams might look like and what team at what level might handle different tasks?
Yeah, at a broader level, right? In a crisis incident response team, there are going to be multiple players. Like, you're certainly going to have the security team and the IT team, right? And they're the ones closest to the technology. You might have a broadcast operations team. I don't know the terminology here, but like essentially the people that are making sure like we're broadcasting. And then I think if you look at the executive side, you're going to have the business leaders, right? You're going to have the lawyers. You're going to have people that interface with the FCC, for example, that may want to know about incidents, and there are going to be questions around, like, what do we tell them and when do we tell them? So I think there's going to be a lot of different players. And, I think that the one thing that I want to get across, Luke, is that, for any significant cybersecurity incident, it's not an IT specific issue, and I think that's a mistake that some executives make, where they're like, okay, we've had a cyber incident, that the IT guys are going to handle that, and they're not, right? Like, they're going to handle their piece of it. I think, to your point, they're going to go find out like how to reset passwords, and working with an external firm. They may do some forensics and try to figure out what happened and kick the attacker out. But if you look back at the examples that we gave earlier around extortion and ransomware, they're not going to make the decision around payment, right? They're going to come to you and say, here's potentially the information that was taken. Here's how long it might take us to get back online if you pay or if you don't pay. But those decisions ultimately are back on you, right? I think that's important to know. Now, they're also going to come to you with questions where they'll say, hey, I'll give you an example where we had an active attacker like in the network, and unfortunately, we knew early enough, Luke, in this case, where the FBI notified the victim. They told them, hey, there's an attacker that's had typically engaged in extortion and ransomware, and we think you have roughly about 4 days to kick them out, and if you don't, this is going to look really bad. So we worked very quickly to try to like identify and kick out the attacker. But part of the question was, well, do we shut down access for a bunch of people like right now? And the IT people are not going to make that decision. They're going to, again, at best, they're going to present two options for you, and that's your choice. So like. And again, I don't know if there's a right answer. It depends on the business and whether you need to keep broadcasting or not, or how well your networks are segmented. But those are some of the the real world issues I think that have come up where it's very important to understand your role, when to escalate. I think, Luke, to your point, and what who has what decision making authority.
Right, yeah, I totally agree. And for organizations that have some size and layers, I would humbly suggest that when something's detected by your security operations people, or it's a serious alert from your endpoint detection and monitoring, that or a call from the outside about your one of your customers or stakeholders is seeing your data online in the dark web, somebody thinks you're breached. So whether that's true or not, it's still a communications and reputational and brand moment anyway. So what we see work well is build a core cyber response team. It's usually not the CEO, level. There's a place for them, and we're going to get to that in a second. But up and out of information security and IT or infrastructure, an escalated incident at a certain threshold that the company will establish, it goes to a core team. And on that team, yes, you have information security represented in IT, which I'm distinguishing as more infrastructure people. But you've also got a legal person in there, and you've got a communications person in there. There may be others, depending on the line of business that's affected, but your plan should define your core incident response team. And what we see work very well is have the core team be the common denominator for every escalated cyber incident, and then have an extended team that's a list of people that you pick and choose from to customize the team for the type of incident. So maybe HR is on there if we think we might have an insider issue and have to interview people, or HR data is affected, or it involves a certain vendor of ours and that person has that vendor relationship. We append that individual to customize the IRT, the incident response team, for that incident. Senior leadership is getting the strategy briefings. Usually, I've not seen it go very well for them to manage the work streams. They're the senior most bosses and leaders. They're thinking big picture strategy thoughts. Give them the briefings and situational reps, and they're going to decide ultimately things like what you said, Dave. Do we shut everything down? Because it's a business risk decision as much as it is anything else. Are we going to pay a ransom? Are we going to make a report to a particular stakeholder? Are we going to come out and make a public statement? Those are usually not even the core team's decision. It's their recommendation, and they may draft the statement. They may provide the evidence or basis for the decision. Senior leadership's receiving strategy decisions. As we said, with smaller organizations, smaller broadcasters, it may be just a two-tier structure.
Yeah.
Some of our clients just have, a flat structure and escalate that way.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to what you just said, Luke, is in addition to the organization, which I agree with 100%, is if you think about like when a incident happens and who you need to pull together and how you need to pull together, it's quite chaotic at the time, because you don't have all the information, right? Like we oftentimes describe incident responses like the fog of war, where you could see maybe a foot in front of you and you don't know if the attacker's still in your network or not. You don't know if they took all the data, but you're still forced with making some of these decisions. And sometimes you can't get a hold of Bob because he's off in Hawaii somewhere, right? And so it's like these really chaotic situations where I think having a battle rhythm of, hey, here's how often we're going to meet, here's where we're going to convene, once a day, twice a day, wherever it is, and then people can kind of go off in their own directions to do their work independently and then come back together. And again, it has to be the right team, Luke, right? So you're communicating the right things, people know what to expect, and then the decisions are there and you move on. And that's where I've seen, very, big companies, small companies, well-rehearsed companies struggle is just on that coordination.
Then there's the outside vendors, like a Mandiant,
Sure.
for example. So rather than wait for your cyber insurer to foist upon you whoever's most available, least busy, I should say, it may be that you want to meet those vendors and have a say in it ahead of time. And I'm showing my bias as strongly recommending that you insert yourself there and not just let an insurer dictate your response and who you're going to turn the keys of your response over to for your organization. Make sure you're comfortable with the forensic firm, the law firm, the crisis communications vendor. A lot of questions we get are about ransom negotiators. Meet them. Meet 2 or 3. Decide what the right fit is. Is it worth a retainer or not? And maybe not, but what are others doing, in your sector at different size and scale? Everyone has at some point limited resources, but if you'll take a little bit of time to think through and game these out, You could then take that selected set of vendors and work with them on a tabletop, like the last panels mentioned simulations and exercises. Can't endorse it enough. So we'll go ahead here. So, it's not just IT and InfoSec, number one. It's multi-stakeholder, it's cross-functional, actionable plans. You don't want a big flowery policy document that says, cybersecurity is very important to us, and we take all of this very seriously. Take all that wonderful flowery language and keep it in your policy documents. You want this very break glass, C-spot run, whatever you want to say. It needs to be actionable. It shouldn't be a 80-page tome that makes a great door stopper, as a client once said about a plan that they had from someone. So make it operational, checklisty, visual, whatever lets you put it into play. Key vendors, get them pre-approved, as we said. You want to understand, as Dave said, the fog of war. If I could distill breach response into one phrase, it is making decisions based on incomplete facts. It's getting comfortable with that. It's like the pain of any kind of endurance event or something that you go through that you train for. You're used to understanding that on day 1 and 2 we're not going to know very much, but based on what we do know, here's our North Star in terms of the decisions we're going to try to make. Well-managed communications is another key. Let's go ahead. So if there's one slide to take away, I would say maybe it's this one, but we're often asked, Dave, by boards and leadership teams, hey, Luke, can you and your team come in and brief us or do a simulation or exercise because the leadership team really wants to understand pay, no pay of a ransom.
Right.
And that's nice, but that's probably not even in the top 4 or 5 hardest decisions in the response. It's pretty two-dimensional.
Yep.
But if it gets us in the room to explain what's on the slide here, I'm happy with that. So operational risk, we don't know where they are in the network, as you said.
Right.
We don't know what's infected. Some things might have been encrypted by a threat actor. Other things are infected but didn't encrypt. And other things we may just have taken offline as a mitigation step. Who has authority? What are our options? What connects to what? Where have you seen that kind of planning pay off?
Almost every time. I think if I had 2 takeaways, Luke, one is if you look at the list here, or even the previous slide, none of these are rocket science, right? They're not. They take time and investment, and you need to be focused, but they're not incredibly hard problems. First of all, so I think it's something that most organizations, big or small, can go and try to tackle. I think the other part is just I've done hundreds of incident response for companies, and if I look at the ones that respond well and the ones that don't respond well, the ones that respond well are the ones that have incidents before. Because they've gone through it once, right? And they know what to expect, and they're prepared. Now, I'm not suggesting to anyone in the room or on the call that you need to have one incident before you get better. I just want to be clear. But that you can learn from other people. You can practice, and you can do those tabletop exercises, right? And just having that clear communications, going through the exercises, I think is just very valuable. If I could give you an analogy, you could have a bunch of really good players and hire the best incident response firm and the best lawyers, but if they're playing in an all-star game or at the Olympics and that's their first time playing together, they're not going to play well, right? So you want to practice with the team that you're going to play with, and in incident response you want to have gone through those exercises with the team you're going to respond with, so everybody knows how to coordinate with each other. And I think that's the hallmark of a strong response.
Makes sense. So I would say three and a half major areas for senior leadership where you can't escape this and cede it to the IT or InfoSec team. One is operational risk. On what basis are we going to decide when we don't know if something is safe to leave it up or take it down? Well, it would sure help to know what our options are. Is it all or nothing? Have we segmented things that allow us to take a part of it off but not all of it? What workarounds and business continuity plan do we have? How much of our revenue or service is dependent on that piece versus this piece? We've seen not a lot of great planning around those things. A lot of people have planned business continuity around natural disasters, hurricanes and so forth, or maybe even an active shooter event where everything kind of gets turned off and then fails back over on. But that is not what happens in these cases. It's usually your team, all these things are down. Some we took offline. Some, as I said, are encrypted or infected. We're bringing it back in ones and twos as a mandate or someone scrubs it and goes in from a red to a yellow scanning zone to like a green all clear. What's the order that we want to come back in? Is it just based on technical dependency, or have we considered the business prioritization? Because, dare I say, most have not planned for that. They've ceded this area to BCP planners based purely on technical interdependencies. Hardest area that I see is communication strategy. How do we stage and sequence? What do we come out and say and when? We can't say a whole bunch of things externally and not tell our employees. A lot of places, if they tell their employees, it's not long before it gets out. It's on social media. Threat actors are leveraging it. Yesterday's, response might have been, well, we're going to have a holding statement that we'll release when we're ready. But now you have threat groups going to the media, filing things with the SEC,
Right.
Posting on X and so forth. So they're really more controlling the timing. Nation states don't tend to do that, but others do. And then threat actor engagement. Are we going to open a line? Most demand notes, by the way, are two-staged, meaning they're not telling you pass X in the initial note. They're saying, hi, we've encrypted your systems and taken a bunch of data. Increasingly, it's just the data part. We're going to publish that online unless we hear from you in 72 hours. And that is the initial invitation to a communication. Is that going to be the IT team deciding to respond to the threat actor? I sure hope not. Legal's sure going to weigh in. Probably top of house, probably senior most leadership is going to weigh in and respond and decide, are we opening a line of communication with this group? How will we do sanctions check and diligence, any kind of payment we would consider? How do we know that who we're communicating is who hit us? Like, how would we validate and go through what we call proof of life steps related to data or encryption of files? And then disclosure and market considerations. It could be, an 8K. It could be just knowing that they've affected our emergency broadcast capabilities and we have only hours to report to FCC under the regs to let them know. But Dave, when you design a tabletop, like what makes for a good one to cover the issues?
That's a really good question, Luke. I mean, when we build out tabletops, we're looking at testing the incident response plan first of all. Like, is it a good plan, right? That you could do some of that in advance. I think another part of it is just understanding: have people read the plan and understand their roles and responsibilities, and really internalize it as well too, right? Because there have been many well-written incident response plans that are on the shelf somewhere that when an incident happens, people are not actually following the plan. So, like I said, it's very chaotic, right? And I don't want to blame the victim, but I think us putting together a tabletop exercises that helps them with their muscle memory, helps them understand like, hey, here are really the challenging decisions I need to be made, and what information do I need, and how do I get there, right? But I think to your point, Luke, I think you covered it really well around, the IT team and your other advisors are going to come to you with options, and they're not going to be easy decisions. Whether whether to pay or not comes with pros and cons. Whether to shut down or not comes with pros and cons, and just be ready to understand that those are questions that are going to come.
Right, and the communications piece, we really try to build that into exercises so they understand how complex the timing is. A lot of communications teams are brought in too late. The great thing about broadcasters and about the media industry in general is that's your bread and butter. So the people tend to be very savvy, sophisticated about messaging and communications, and so we don't have to necessarily write everything for them or the crisis vendor. They already really understand how to resonate with an audience and perhaps how to inspire confidence. I think what they're looking to us for is, when do people normally come out and say this much versus that much? Should I, say something different to the regulator than I'm saying, internally, hint, no. You may give different levels of detail to different audiences based on what they need to know. So the FCC may need to know whatever they need to know, they're going to get it. Your key vendor that's deciding whether to block you as a cyber risk to them, they may need to know a lot. But your employees may need a lesser amount, the general public may need an even lesser amount, but everything has to be cohesive as a narrative. Like, it can't be misleading to one audience or another. So I think this is the last one that we have time to touch on, and of course, folks have the slides for any further thing. But Dave, if you've got, Iran lurking and lashing out and the FBI warning companies, what kind of things would you prioritize maybe in an exercise or a drill or training now?
I would be prepared to have systems that are down, right, and test whether you can continue broadcasting or not. And it shouldn't be simple, right? Like, if emails are down, obviously, we're going to keep broadcasting. But if there are key systems, that have been taken out, like, would you be able to continue broadcasting? If the IT team said, well, we're going to shut off everyone from the network, how are we going to get people to where they need to get to upload content and continue broadcasting, right? So I would test yourselves and kind of run through those DR scenarios with a cyber lens, right? And maybe get some context from instant response firms or other peers of yours where, like, what actually went, when there's cyber incidents, like, what did you lose access to? Because we're going to come to you, for example, if we see an active attacker, we're going to say, hey, we're going to want you to block the IPs if we see something, active, and we're going to want you to shut down these accounts, and maybe even, like, reset everyone's passwords, like, all at once. And most organizations aren't going to be able to do that unless they've gone through the drill and prepared for that. So that would be my advice, is to test it that way.
Right. Planning your logging in advance so it's sufficient, your backups out of the network. We've had organizations not be able to contact their employees because all contact information was locked up in the network. Contingency plans, workarounds, a template set of communications for different common cyber scenarios, all gives you a head start and lets you focus on what's unique about this incident. So we're at time. It's been a real privilege and honor to get to speak at the FCC's invitation. This is an extremely important topic, and I'm so glad it's getting so much so much interest from the FCC and the broadcast community and broader media community. We appreciated the chance to do it. George, back over to you.
Thank you, George.
Thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it. That was an incredible presentation and a lot of useful information and for broadcasters to have and actionable steps that they can take to prepare for this, to prepare for the scenarios that you outlined. So that concludes our planned sessions for today. I'm going to turn it over to Leon Kenworthy. He is Chief of the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau's Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability. Thank you all.
Thanks. Thanks, George. As George said, I'm Leon Kenworthy. I'm Chief of the Cybersecurity and Communications Reliability Division. Before I offer just a few quick words of thanks and concluding remarks, one point to add just to that excellent and informative cyber incident response discussion is just a reminder to broadcasters that if you are the victim of a cyber incident that results in transmission of emergency alert system codes or attention signal, you're required to report that to the FCC as part of your the reporting piece of cyber incident response. So as we conclude today's workshop, I want to thank our presenters and panelists for their participation and for the valuable information they've shared. Thank you also to the audience for taking time to learn from today's expert presenters and panelists. I also want to thank the FCC staff who helped put on today's event, including staff in the division and the commission meeting room audiovisual staff. Today we heard about the ever-present threats that can do real harm to broadcasters that are not prepared. Cyber attacks that hijack the airwaves, like those that happened last fall and winter, erode public trust in broadcasters. That trust needs to be maintained so that broadcasters can continue to serve their communities, including by disseminating information about emergencies so that their audiences will listen and take protective action if needed. We also heard from experts that showed us how broadcasters can better prepare themselves to mitigate the risk of cyber attacks and respond effectively in the event of a cyber incident. A clear message from today is that no matter the size or sophistication of your organization, there are tools available to help you secure your systems and develop a cybersecurity risk management plan that suits your needs. The conclusion of today's workshop is not the end of the dialogue. The FCC remains ready to assist broadcasters with the resources you need to achieve cyber preparedness. Don't hesitate to reach out to us and our federal partner agencies if you need us. This concludes today's workshop. We'll return tomorrow for our cybersecurity workshop focused on telecommunications service providers. We hope you'll tune in again. Safe travels to those of you who joined us in person, and for remote attendees, we look forward to continued collaboration. Thank you.